Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining in. I've spent the last week or so spending a lot of time looking into Charles Eisenstein and sort of how his involvement in the RFK Jr. campaign, what role he's playing and sort of what it says about the larger picture of what's going on. Before I get started, I just wanted to sort of, just by way of a little update, so I'm going to probably do a stream today, and there's a lot of material, so I don't think I'll get through it all, and you'll be bored to tears to listen to all of it at once. So I'll probably do another stream tomorrow, and then I may have some more stuff, but it's my mother's 80th birthday coming up, so I'm going to be going out of town, and I'm going to take her to the beach for a bit, so I won't be back until like the first week of June. So if there's a bit of a break on the channel, you'll know why. It's just I'm away taking care of family stuff, which is important. And just by way of making things personal, my friend Eve, who did the wonderful zine, came over. She's in town also taking care of family things, and she brought me some more shells. So my stash had been somewhat diminished. And so look, I have all of these beautiful shells. I went to the Jersey Shore with my husband last weekend, but they don't have beautiful shells like these there. So thank you so much, Eve, for that. And just by way, I know sometimes I've been talking a little bit about like my quilting project. So I'd hoped to finish this for my mom. She doesn't watch my videos, so it's fine. But I only got the top done, but this is the quilt project that I've been working on here. Let me transition over to picture. Yeah, so this is the quilt that I've been working on. It's called All the Good is the Pattern. It's sort of modern improvisational, and I think it looks sort of beachy. So yeah, so that's just personal Allison news before we get down to business. And this presentation may feel a little bit scattered. There's a lot going on, and I actually made two maps that I've linked to. This is the sort of the smaller map, the network map. And the streams that I want to do, they bring together two different items that happen to me like essentially on the same day. The last stream I did, I was looking into this guy, W. Aaron Van Diver, who had written a piece for The Defender promoting eco-libertarianism as sort of his solution to the climate issue. And he cited this gentleman named Jem Bendell, who had been previously affiliated with Extinction Rebellion, but then supposedly sort of fell back and said, no, that's too totalitarian. We need another model. What I found out the same day that I learned that Charles Eisenstein was now the sort of, in-house advisor for the RFK Jr. campaign, or philosopher, or what have you, I saw that Jem Bendell, who had been referenced in, again, this Van Diver article, Van Diver had written quite a few things, at least half a dozen things for The Defender, so sort of is a regular in that space. And he had written this post about, can we reboot the environmental movement so it protects freedom too, with a lot of flag waving there. And then further, it was quite a long article, but there was a whole big section promoting this new book by Jem Bendell, Breaking Together. And for what it's worth, I think that this breaking together concept is very much about like the slime mold model. Create a crisis, band all of the cells together, create a self-sacrifice zone for the spore, and then move on to other pastures. So, Jem Bendell was prominently featured, and when I was looking at his Twitter feed, he had actually tweeted on the 15th. Yeah, so I guess I've been working on this about a week and a half. Professor Jem Bendell, this is a tweet from May 15th. Some of the best examples of a hashtag great reclamation of our power comes from the community economics initiatives in Kenya with grassroots economics. And he retweeted a tweet from Will Ruddick, who is someone that I've had my eye on, and Leo has done quite a bit of research into grassroots economics and their connections in the digital currency space. And ostensibly cooperative economics, but cooperative economics with a digital protocol layer underpinning, which is really where things are all going. And so I found out at the time that it turns out that Bendell had actually been working with grassroots economics since 2012. This is a tweet from October of 2012. Will Ruddock of Community Forums, Forge, and EcoPesa are here presenting on complementary currency in Geneva. And so 11 years ago, really when a lot of this new economic system was being remade. And so wow, I was like, well, you're not really this. Yeah, I always say, beware of the conversion story. And I say this just because in my own personal experience, the people who come and say they've seen the light and they're the insider who's like figured it out and is now can give you all sorts of really glowing insights into how people think because they're the insider, it often does not work out well. And so for me, this idea that he had been sort of aligned with a corporate environmental movement and then seen the light and was now working for some more regenerative program, when I saw this, I'm like, no, you've actually, like, the long game has always been community currency. And I think that that's something that we have to start coming to terms with in terms of understanding, like, what are we in? What is really going on? How do we understand the game that we are in? Because within this sort of cognitive domain management, right, within the storytelling, especially I think that the quote unquote resistance has been managed in very specific ways to inhabit a certain story. And in many ways, I think this story of community currency is supposed to feel liberating, right? All of the people who are picking up the tokens, whether they be, attention economy media tokens or crypto tokens or, even, Catherine Austin Fitts really promoting community currencies, maybe not the digital ones, but in concept that maybe the game that we're in isn't. They use the totalitarian authoritarianism launching point to boost us into the longer range game, which is tagged decentralization systems analysis, like self-emergent, self-organizing systems. And in that, this protocol layer of Web3 and these quote unquote like specialty currencies that we're going to be using as signals are a key part of it. And I think that's really important to know because it turns out that Charles Eisenstein is so deeply into that space as well. So the two things sort of converge together with Jem Bandel, formerly of corporate environmentalism, now for eco-libertarianism, breaking together as the slime mold, and Charles Eisenstein, who, as it turned out, when I was, so let me go over to this other map. So this is my other map. And essentially it's looking at Eisenstein and RFK Jr. And I'm going to take a minute to sort of play my highlights clip from his Bitcoin conversation in Miami. And what I did was I pulled out, they actually had done a podcast together a year ago about climate and carbon. And so all of these yellow dots in the circle are clips from that interview a year ago, which is kind of funny because if you buy into the Substack story that Charles tells is sort of like, oh, it was just a serendipitous meeting at a falconry event that led them to join forces for this campaign. When realistically, it doesn't take a whole lot of looking to know that they had been collaborating for over a year. But so these are all of these clips. And then on the outer rings, I have sort of how Charles Eisenstein's affiliation with Cello, which is one of these social impact protocol layer enabling humanitarian aid community currencies, how it's actually going to go. And so I'm sort of in this framing. How shall we say? I think in one of the clips, Charles says, don't write anybody off. It's not good. That's the dominator principle, right? And like, woe is me that I would want to be the dominator. So I'm not writing Charles off, but it does. I find it really difficult when people tell these very eloquent, emotionally, like heartrending stories about the world and a future that they want. And in reality, their actions, in his case being an advisor to Cello, which is the Web3 protocol layer, are not in alignment with that. And they speak very much about sort of morality and coming from this right place and these larger, spiritual leanings. But the truth is you don't have to look very hard for it to all start to come apart. And if you actually did embody those values truthfully, and we're all very complex beings, so I'm not saying like, there can't be redemption, but someone who authentically understands would then be in a position to have to speak out about what he had been involved with. And that hasn't been happening. And so many of the frames in the sort of the climate interview that he and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did last year were actually setting up Web3 impact markets, which is really, to me, worse than people who are just outright saying they're doing it, right? And then you can debate and say, I disagree with this, I think this is wrong. Someone who's trying to cover it over and make it so that it disappears and inviting you into a story when you don't really know what it's about. Okay, so those are the two things coming together. So it turns out that Charles, when I was looking into his work, and I've shared this on my YouTube channel, so some of you guys may have seen it already, but he was a keynote speaker at a summer of 2019 event at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at the 75th anniversary of the Bretton Woods conference, which essentially established the World Bank and the IMF and created the global economic order of the post-World War II era, right? And it was a lot of economic coordination such as was available at that point. But clearly, at that point, the era of cybernetics was really just opening up. I mean, at that conference, the time, I think maybe a year later, they would start the Macy conferences, right, of cybernetics. And so the ability to engineer economies at a very, very granular level through tokenization, which is what Will Ruddick is working on, along with Michael Zargham and these various people with the bonding curves and token engineering, this was melding community currency as a signaling and coordination mechanism, as a language. And the host of this event, her name was Galia Benartzi. It turns out that she's a niece by marriage of Benjamin Netanyahu. Her father's sister is his third wife, and very connected because they brought together like 200 people, including people from the central bank community, Larry Summers, many people from the blockchain community to start planning out the next phase of what Bretton Woods 2 would look like in this coming era of cybernetics and token engineering. And Charles was there, and he was telling a story. He was telling a story about a new story of money. And in this one of the stories he was talking about was like channeling the oversoul of Mother Earth and saying that Mother Earth was dying, and so unconditional love was over, and that the new era was going to be Lover Earth, but we had to prove, humans had to get their act together and prove that they were a worthy lover, and they would do that through gifts and performing gifts in ways that could be documented, which will be the protocol layer. And so, I know there are a lot of people who are annoyed at the whole Gaia worship thing, and I can see, like, if you're following along with people like Charles Eisenstein and you see this sort of embedded hypocrisy in that, like, yeah, like this Gaia worship is unpleasant. But I actually am coming to this from a sense that there are things that are terribly wrong with how we manage the environment and our relationship to it. But I know that the answers that are going to be developed in rooms like Mount Washington are probably, it's going to be a new game, and the rest of us that are going to be invited into the commons of their gaming, we're not going to understand the rules of the game. We're going to be told stories about what the game is, and we're not going to fully understand it, and it's not going to be good. It's just going to be the newest generation of not good. And so Eisenstein, again, not to write him off, but he's playing a role, and his role is a storyteller. And the more I sort of looked into the people around him and the influences, essentially what it seems like he is a public face to put together ideas about economic systems that date back, almost 100 years, and have been presented by various people at various points in time. But it's his turn to sort of carry the ball and then cover over the climate authoritarianism with another story, which is that we should be like lovers to the earth, and that this is all sort of conditional on the behaviors that we perform. And, and he even mentions in his presentation at Bretton Woods, he talks about how important digital currency is to that. And I didn't realize, I don't follow Charles super closely, so I didn't realize that was he was calling for like a debt jubilee, universal basic income, and that it would happen through digital currency, which is really one of the things that a lot of people have been concerned about early on. So let's see. So I guess I'm going to start off with just playing the RFK Jr.'s Bitcoin. Oh, sorry. Bitcoin talk, because I think that'll give me a frame. And I know several people said, "Oh, I was waiting for you to actually comment on this talk." So I'm gonna play this. It's about 3 minutes, and I might pause a few times just to give my insights about what I'm hearing.
Is a bulwark against precisely this kind of government and corporate expansion and intrusion. I will defend the right of self-custody of Bitcoin and other digital assets.
Now, I will just point out, this was sort of a quick transition, but and Leo pointed this out as well. Bitcoin and other digital assets. And so that's key to the tokenomics is, even though he's at Bitcoin and later on he says, well, I'm not here to give you investment advice or to say which will work, like that's about the market will decide that. But it's important that the other digital assets are included. And then they're also talking about corporate overreach and government overreach. Now, I think that's a key part of what we're being set up for is the story of decentralization and commoning, right? The little guy, and how you will be a participant in the game will be through your digital wallet. So when he's talking about protecting your custody of holding your Bitcoin in your wallet, it really is your digital identity and your digital twin, but that's not being said.
You should be able to own your own private keys the same as you own the keys to your car or own your wallet.
Now, if they were being honest and forthright, what RFK Jr. would be talking about is the fact that beyond health passporting, right? The conversation really didn't ever go much beyond the health passporting, is that the digital twins are the blockchain wallet, right? That the predictive analytics will be based on what is the contents of your wallet, whether those are some sort of tokenized currencies, behavioral currencies, soul-bound tokens, NFTs, that aggregated data will be you, right? It's not just about holding a Bitcoin wallet. It's about something much more complex and sophisticated. And you would think that 3 years in, we would have moved on to the fact that we could talk about that's what it was. Now, they will set it up because, the guy Van Diver, he was promoting eco-libertarianism, right? You will be the custodian of your data. Maybe you will benefit from your data and allowing its use in various capacities, but they're going to make it very difficult for you to not be a digital commodity in some respect. And, if you've seen my video from like 2018, the little one that I did about blockchain life on the ledger, towards the end, we talked about like access to the wallet. And if you're someone who has multi-millions of dollars, you're never going to have to unlock your wallet to show your data. I mean, not never, but like to get money. Ultimately, the vast majority of people will be put onto universal basic income and not have viable work, right? They'll be compensated with some sort of tokens for volunteering. And you will have to top off your ability to live with your data, like access to your data. If the most elite people won't, there are probably relatively few instances where they're going to have to actually open up their wallet against their will to show what their data is. And so I think this is really important.
Your wallet, whether it's in your pocket or in your computer, is your own.
Yes, your twin.
I don't think the government has the right to demand access to your Bitcoin key or indeed any of your passwords.
So again, he's speaking to the Bitcoin crowd, but what I want to say is he's framing it as the government wants your money. The government wants to know. And again, this is very calculated. This is part of the narrative that's been fed through most of the resistance influencers out there. They want to keep your focus on central bank digital currency, and they want to keep it on the government, because I believe that the next phase of the game is the decentralization and you being an agent with custody of data that's shared and collaborated with and monitored through the protocol layer. They want that activity to happen, but it has to happen digitally. So the story that we need to primarily be concerned about just central bank digital currency, which again, at the ultimate, the tippy top, the Bank for International Settlements is going to control the ultimate ledger. But there's going to be a lot more loosey-goosey stuff at the lower levels because there, as I see it, based on the information that I keep uncovering, the community currency narrative has been coming through since the 80s, and always probably with the intention that it would ultimately go digital. And that is a much more robust palette for the AI pattern seeking than simply one digital currency, whether it be Bitcoin or a central bank digital currency. So it's not just about the government, and it's not just about custody of the wallet.
To say otherwise is to cede essential territory to the surveillance state.
Now, again, the surveillance state. He's framing the surveillance state as they want access to your key to look at your money, right? And that's not the surveillance state is eventually, I'm going to talk about Charles Eisenstein's connections to Cello and Sepp Kanbar. Sepp Kanbar was setting up Montessori preschools with artificial vision cameras and sensors in the shoes of the children to track their social, and that's not the government, right? That's not the government doing that. That is a private entity that's imposing that level of surveillance. And the surveillance itself, it's not just watching in case you do something criminal. It's actually to develop the patterns to make the predictions and then to engineer the people. Like that's what the surveillance is to create the emergent system. And so to frame it in these really simple terms, again, I think is oversimplifying and distracting from the larger concern of the protocol layer.
The whole point of Bitcoin is that it's decentralized.
Decentralized. That's what they want. The goal, and again, I'm not saying that I approve or I think totalitarianism is good. But in this next phase, the phase of emergence, they need everything to be decentralized.
And it's important not only for Bitcoin, but for democracy to be decentralized.
Now that's going to be coming up with the radical participatory democracy, right? The everybody voting on everything, and that you have your AI robot voting on your behalf, and there are prediction markets and betting markets on all forms of public policy. And that the governance, because governance is cybernetics, that is Kubernetes, it's government, that will be happening at all different levels. Like they imagine that you will have economies, free market economies in your biology with nanobots. They believe that we will have free market economies of not just money, but token voting in your all sorts of communities, all sorts of interest groups that you belong to, right? Your school, your sports teams, all of these things will be creating their own tokenized market exchanges to create the signals for the AI pattern seeking.
President Biden's 30% tax on energy for Bitcoin miners requires an invasive surveillance apparatus to monitor what is happening in individual computers.
Now, I'm going to point out later, and if you've seen the clip I shared when he was talking about with a group in Houston in 2012, essentially they were talking about energy credits and for having a decentralized energy grid run as a free market, and that the energy companies would come in and do renovations with smart appliances in your home and then fund those like they would a dam project, a hydroelectric dam project. So here he's saying he doesn't want the government to have that level of surveillance over you, whereas a decade ago, he was actually saying he'd like for the free market to be able to access your home with various kind of heating and cooling and other appliances and control it that way. So on the one hand, like, what is RFK Jr., right? Is he somebody that's concerned about energy use, or isn't he? Because to me, this is a pandering opportunity, right? If you've created your career around environmentalism and then you say that you care about that, but now you're turning around and saying, oh, but it doesn't really matter. The only reason they're going after Bitcoin is because they're afraid of having something outside the government. I don't buy it. I think that doesn't really show that you have a strong moral value. Now, again, I consider myself an environmentalist. I'm also very skeptical of the consensus around what is happening and the time frame, because I think that the trauma crisis mentality, the limits to growth mentality that has come through many thought leaders, including Charles Eisenstein, since the 70s, is advancing us into this cybernetic steady state control grid, which I also don't believe, so I'm not an apologist for big energy or big oil in any way, but, I think I don't know exactly how to resolve this, all of the issues, but I do know that it's important. And for me, the flip-flop here is telling.
It sets a terrible precedent in which everything that you do that requires electricity must now be monitored by the government. Now,
I would say that his interest is he would like it to be managed by free market economics. And, I've mentioned in the past, one of the people I'm going to be talking about is John Clippinger and Sandy Pentland, and they came up with this open mustard seed platform, which was early digital identity in 2013. And they actually gathered not far from Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, when they had their initial retreat for that. The open mustard seed became the ID3 platform that was based in Cambridge for about a decade. And then in 2019, it moved to Austin. And at that point, they changed its name to the Token Commons Foundation. It has a footprint in Switzerland, and they switched from digital identity to energy economics. And the company that they were affiliated with was called Switch, SWYTCH. So there is something about the energy futures trading that is central to this. And I think ultimately the organization of these emergent systems, like social systems, social computation, will happen through the engineering of the circuits. And those are going to be power grid circuits, and they're going to be linked to digital money electrical circuits, and potentially like our inner bioelectrical signals circuits. So at every level, there are going to be circuits in place to manage this. And I think that's why, the big oil isn't outside of this. The big oil is right front and center, and especially the energy futures traders. And that's why I think there's been so much focus on Texas in particular to get them onto the blockchain.
That's why I also support people's rights to refuse smart meters in their homes. I will make sure that the United States remains the global hub of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Well, and again, I would say that's, the whole point of decentralization is that it isn't a nationalist framing, right? And so to say that you're endorsing a technology that is not supervised and decentralized, but you're going to continue to make the U.S. the center of it, especially since, China has been doing so much of the mining, the crypto mining, it doesn't actually make sense. That's just a pandering comment in my...
Events like the FTX calamity prove that some kind of regulation of the crypto industry is needed.
And that was always coming. And that's what I've said in the past. The, anarchapulco, libertarian, capitalist sort of greed frame was going to swing back to the tokenized commons. It was always going to be, it's not the tool, it's how you use it. And so that the FTX was set up, especially with embedded altruism or effective altruism embedded in it, to come back and set up the tokenized commons, which will be the restored radical democracy that I think that the Kennedy Democrats will be ushering in.
My administration will consult with knowledgeable people like yourselves.
So again, knowledgeable. So these are some of the richest people like in the country, the people who are holding crypto. These are the tech billionaires. Now, throughout the lockdowns, many people in the resistance have pointed out the issue of huge transfers of wealth, right? The huge transfers of wealth were happening in the technology sector. Now, these are the very self-same people, like the Mark Andreessens, who are setting up Web3 token engineering. This is what's coming. And so, again, there were so many people that were hurt economically by the lockdowns. To say that you're going to sort of advantage the crypto society. These are not just, sure, at some point, these are everyday people who are taken in and doing trading. They're not realizing what the game is. But the people who are controlling these systems are billionaires, right? This is a billionaire's game, the crypto game. It's not happening. These little people, like you might think that you have a wallet that has certain amounts of money. They can disappear that overnight if they want, right? It's the high level players, and it's because it's about the cybernetics.
To establish sensible jurisdiction and governance. The environmental argument should not be used as a smokescreen for an agenda of suppressing Bitcoin.
So I do think that eventually he's going to loop around to next-gen nuclear, and I've said that in that other presentation.
I'm not an investor, and I'm not here to give investment advice or to promote Bitcoin over other cryptocurrencies or other currencies.
Okay, so
that's the job of the free market, not the President of the United States.
Again, so Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has framed his position as free market, or sometimes he says fair market. As I'm going to show some clips from the Bancorp presentation by Charles Eisenstein, that is not at all his position, right? What he was promoting was debt jubilee, universal basic income, and digital currency. And so which is it? Like if you're going to be the philosopher of a campaign, right? If you are going to be the storyteller of the campaign, and I know that in his Substack he said, well, I don't agree with him on everything, but this seems to be at the core, right? Which are you, Charles? I mean, are you in alignment with free market economics, eco-libertarianism, or are you in alignment with this idea of a steady state token engineered economy? Or are they maybe both the same thing, right? Are they going to be threaded together in this transpartisan narrative and be brought together? And that's what I think. I think one side is speaking out of one side of the mouth and the other is the other, to bring people together, to bring, the left and right together behind, the digital circuitry of the protocol layer. And again, I would just point out, like right in the middle of that QR code for accepting Bitcoin, which is this Kennedy, for those who are listening, it's at this point, a screen comes up and there's a QR code to scan for giving Bitcoin, donating Bitcoin to the campaign. And I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to work out in terms of like campaign finance laws and transparency, because again, what RFK Jr. keeps saying is like, I don't need to tell anybody about my donors, and we need to be, the government doesn't have a right to know. So I don't know how all of the Bitcoin donations are going to work out in terms of like political, but that's concerning to me. If he's not interested in letting people know who's donating to Children's Health Defense, do we not have a right to know which crypto, people are donating to his campaign? Because again, I think he wants to present himself as being on the side of the regular people, right? The regular people, the bring back regular liberalism or something like that. But if that message is being bankrolled by elite crypto technocrats, then it's inconsistent.
Bitcoin embodies two of my highest ideals, transparency and trust. Americans have come to distrust the government, including the way that it has manipulated our money supply to benefit the very rich and to prosecute endless wars.
So again, the goal is don't trust the government, right? But what, trust the crypto billionaires? Like, is that what we're swapping out? Don't trust the government. And I'm not saying, surely there are many aspects of the government that are concerning, but they're still elected, right? If what we're moving to on Web3 is a free market in token trading run by AI portfolios, you can say there's accountability, but there's only accountability to the system as it's encoded, and regular people aren't encoding that system, right? Essentially, we're moving into a machine regulated world. And we haven't had enough conversations to say that that's going to be in any way better. Because like he said, who is he going to consult with about this? Well, he's going to consult with the Bitcoin people to get their advice. Well, do you think the Bitcoin people are going to be representative of all the people of the world? They're not, right? They're a certain select interest group. And so, again, to frame it as accountability and transparency, that we shouldn't trust the government, that we should trust what? The machine? I mean, we should trust literally the machine, like encryption and coding because to me that doesn't speak to the Kennedy legacy as they like to sell it to you. I think they like to sell it to you as something that's like humane and authentic, but the machine isn't that. It can never be that.
Bitcoin is a neutral currency.
It's not neutral. None of this is neutral.
Proud to make an historic announcement, but first, if you can please pull out your cell phones. Our campaign will be the first presidential campaign in history to accept Bitcoin donations through the Lightning Network.
Okay, and so I just want to point out, like, so he's saying, get out your cell phones, right? Now, this goes back to what I was talking about, you know, when Jason and Leo and I did this, you know, the atomic ecologies thing last year. The early track and trace were radioisotope. And those were economies within ecosystems. That was what the Odom brothers were working on. And I'm forgetting the guy's name at Yale. So they were working on exchanges, metabolic energy exchanges in ecosystems. That was early with radioisotopes. Eventually, that system of remote sensing through radioactive material evolved into now is these stupid digital devices that we have. Like, this is our track and trace. So if on the one hand you're saying we're worried about surveillance, but on the other hand you're saying get out your cell phone to give us money, like, think about that, right? Because at that point you're pinging, right? Anyone who's submitting these transactions, like, that's part of the simulation. That's part of the data harvest. And essentially, we're authorizing a future where we're governed by the devices, right? Where our behaviors are governed. It's convenient, right? It might be efficient. We're moving bytes instead of bits instead of atoms. But when he says get out your cell phone, that is like pull out your digital identity, your digital wallet, to participate in the future, right? To participate in, you know, the Kennedy legacy 2.0, which is going to be connected into the cybernetic control grid.
All of you, I know, are here, again, not because you love a currency, but because you love our country, you love democracy, you love freedom. And in that sense, your support of Bitcoin puts you in the same category as the framers of the Constitution that gave us that Bill of Rights, that created these democratic institutions.
Now, again, as the Philadelphian, Tim Scott has a good piece in Dissident Voice called The Duplicitous Constitution. And he does a very thorough analysis of how that document was structured in a way to tell a really good story, but then to conceal the actual nature of power and who holds the power, which were landed men, and then to give you a Bill of Rights, but to have it be set outside of that so that really you could only access those rights if you had the resources to take something to the Supreme Court, right, and preside and win your case, right? And so there are a lot of good stories that were told about the Founding Fathers, about the Constitution, and I'm not here to say, like, hey, why don't we just throw it all open and have Soros redesign it? I'm not saying that. That's not where I'm coming from. But I'm skeptical as to the actual nature of that document, and knowing that the future of democracy is going to happen through tokens. It's going to happen through your darn cell phone or through, you're not even going to need a device ultimately, right? And that it's going to be through these protocol twin agents. So for him to keep citing democracy in the context of his Bitcoin speech, again, highlights that the control grid is coming through various kinds of tokens, some of which represent the thing that we imagine as money, and some of which are going to be represented as things that we imagine are votes. And then some of them are simply going to be tokens that represent, behaviors, right, or compliance within the game. And those are going to be the other kinds of tokens. So all of these tokens are living in your wallet. And to me, for him saying, like, yes, come on, I want to be the leading candidate of Bitcoin, is essentially agreeing to the control grid. Saying that you're doing it for democracy and transparency and decentralization, but essentially doubling down that, yes, the future lives in the QR code, right? The future lives in the, think about that. Like what we saw unfold during lockdowns and us living on QR code culture. And in many respects, those of us who were regulated by QR codes would find that that's a pretty grotesque symbol, right? But we're just supposed to agree to it now because it's like our guy that's doing it. So I think that's really, we should pause. And I think they're not asking people to pause and think about what they're really seeing right in front of their face.
And you are the current manifestation of that impulse. Bitcoin.
Okay, so that's that. All right, so I want to start off with this optical illusion because I think understanding the game is really important. And we need to understand it to be able to figure out what Charles Eisenstein is doing on the campaign. And there's a number of these different ones. Some of them are like there's the two faces facing one another, and then there's a chalice. So like, do you see the faces of the chalice? This one is, do you see the young woman or the old lady or the young woman? And if you're looking at the young woman, it's sort of the side of her face and her eyelash and nose and her dark hair and in a muff and a feather like in her hair. And if you see the old woman, the line of her cheek is actually the nose of the old woman, and then the eye and this choker for the young woman is the mouth. And so this is a very old and classic optical illusion. And I mean, on this, I would assume that probably there might be equal percentages of people who see one or the other. And then once you point it out, you can probably see both. And so what I'm trying to do in this is to sort of point out that I think that there's an optical illusion in this, and that what RFK Jr. is selling us on, and many of the influencers out there, is this idea of they're selling the authoritarian, this idea of authoritarianism. The threat is authoritarianism. The threat is the government. To get your freedom, you need a digital wallet, and that we need this decentralized democracy, right, in order to face off against the authoritarian government. Now, I'm not here to say that the government, that things that happened around the world were not authoritarian, but I would say they have as much to do with the private sector, as well as the nonprofit sector, as well as the academic sector, as they do about just the government, right? And so to frame the authoritarianism as simply one entity is inaccurate, because what's coming is the public-private partnership that is endorsed by academia and research scientists. So they want you to focus on the authoritarian aspect. And I think that they want to keep you in that place, that's the thing to worry about. I think for me, what I'm really concerned about is gamified life. That we're going to move from the authoritarian phase, which was the catalyst, into a gamified life with the token engineered rules. And they're doing this not to just make money, not just to make us miserable and to be the boss of us and to make us do things that we don't want to do, but actually they want to embrace the wisdom of the crowd, right? And so in that, they need everything tagged. They need all of the metadata interoperable and aggregated, and they're going to use our interactions at every level, from our own internal biological interactions up to our social interactions, up to like global workforce, to track human decision making and to do this biohybrid computing. And they're going to say that this is about self-actualization, that this is about us emerging into this new phase of evolution that is cooperative, that is collaborative, that is like the social insects, that is the ant computer that I keep talking about. And this is something that I don't hear. I mean, there are a lot of people talking about it who are doing this research, and in any one of these things, you know, and there's quite a number of people who continue to send me things about cybernetics and systems theory and emergence and complex adaptive systems, and great comments. You know, Rodrigo and Hanging Thief and a lot of good thinkers, and Lorraine Davison around the Talhar Desjardins and the noosphere, and of course, you know, Steffers has done a lot of this work in the nanotech space and the swarming within the nanotech. So this is, I think, where we should be focusing our attention at this point. Again, not to say that, to dismiss what happened in the past and say that it was not a problem, but it was a transition. We're in a phase transition, I think. And as with this optical illusion, they want to keep you focused on one viewpoint and not to see the totality of it. And I think we have to be able to have a flexible enough cognition to see and hold both at once in order to navigate what's coming. And so I keep saying that the libertarian stuff is important. And what I didn't realize is, so you know what, I'm going to go over to this beautiful money thing here. So we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We have Eisenstein, who's now the campaign advisor. And he gave this keynote at Bretton Woods. And so here he is on the porch. And it's interesting, this is a video that was done by Crypto Banter, CNBC Africa. It's about a 40-minute documentary about the event, and I would highly recommend, if you have 40 minutes, to watch the whole thing. I cut it down to about 10 minutes, and I probably am going to show that in a few minutes. But I think this is the next game. So Charles is there. They're developing a new language through the cybernetic engineering, and let's see. How do I not have the whole? I'm sorry, I don't have my handle on all of the. So here, Bancor was the host, and Bancor was led by Galia Benartzi. Essentially, it was based on this concept advanced by John Maynard Keynes and E.F. Schumacher of having a supranational currency that would be a multilateral clearing system. And this was in the 1940 to 1942 that was developed as this an international currency unit of account. And this was put forward in the original Bretton Woods gathering, and it was shot down. And EF, but I'd heard of, Keynes, but I didn't realize that Schumacher was part of Bancor as well. And Schumacher is essentially behind this like Buddhist economics and community currency and all of the things that are coming. And like, it just wasn't time yet. It wasn't time in 1945 to do that, but it's going to be time now. And that's what Charles and Galia are ushering in, is this new era with the digital currency systems, and then having Robert F. Kennedy, presenting at Bitcoin just speaks to that to me. So, what, before I get going to, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the framing here, because so Charles announced this in his Substack. The Substack that, was featured, this Heal the Divide 2024. And he made this announcement that he has this major life change, and he really thinks that RFK Jr. is the leader we need today to bring people together and heal the divisions and tap into these shared moral values. And again, I would say, if Charles truly believed in moral values, he would be thinking harder about his attachments to Cello and what's coming next. I didn't know that Charles was involved in the digital currency space, but here he's writing for the Peer-to-Peer Foundation in 2013 about where digital currency needs to go next. And he's leaning into digital currency. And actually, in this, he talks about designing digital currency to be like a self-regulating, homeostatic living organism. And so I would say, actually, Bitcoin has been compared to that as a homeostatic living organism. And Ervin Laszlo, the systems theorist, he was always wanting to run the world on a homeostat. And that's part of what Charles was promoting, is this steady state economy, like a homeostat, degrowth and homeostatic organism. So, that fits very closely with these ideas. And here's an article from the Medium. He's talking about we need to change the story of money. And so he's there presenting this idea of a new social economic system, which isn't really what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is promoting. But this is what he was promoting is a new story of money. And I think in this space, I see, I call this series Camelot Corner because, again, the whole Kennedy legacy and Camelot. And I think it's interesting to think back about the Round Table and the Knights of the Round Table, this idea of Arthurian legend. And again, that it's decentralized, right? It's supposed to be horizontal governance, and that the Round Table is sort of like a decentralized autonomous organization. That's what the DAOs are. That's what's coming. So in many ways, having Camelot like ushering in this new era of a round table makes a lot of sense. There's a number of images of this round table, and it actually is shaped like a donut. It has a hole in the middle. So it's not a circular table. It's a round table with a hole in the middle, like a donut. And I feel like what they're pushing is this idea of love. And this donut economics, which is also Kate Raworth talks about that. She's also connected with a lot of the community currency, is the torus field. The donut is the torus field. And so to me, it feels a bit like Charles Eisenstein is the storyteller. He is the troubadour. He is the troubadour who's going to tell us a new story of money. And it's a story where the money can be about beauty and be about love. And I feel like, but the inversion of this is that the mechanism for this beautiful money or this money of love is that it comes in a cybernetic grid system. And a machine can't love. A machine can't love. And so I find that this really interesting. So I feel like the role that Charles is playing is this courtly poet, is someone who is brought in, I called him a troubadour. The troubadour was sort of a central figure in medieval literature, and he would sing songs dealing with chivalry and courtly love. And later on, he talks about love being, all of this being about love. That we've moved from Mother Earth to Lover Earth, and so that's very much in line with the troubadour. And then the story that he tells in his Substack was that, and this Substack was from May 15th of 2023. It's titled A Major Life Change. And it says, it all started a couple of months ago with a coincidence. And it's interesting that he does put air quotes around coincidence. So maybe that's his hedging on that it wasn't really a coincidence. It said, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knew my work vaguely before then as a fellow COVID dissident and environmentalist, but that had little to do with this coincidence. One of my readers won a fundraising raffle for a day of falconry with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. She was allowed to take a guest, and so she invited me. And so it sort of talks about, like, he didn't really like falconry, but he had admired Kennedy, so he accepted the offer. And then it says, at one point over lunch, Mr. Kennedy turned and said, Charles, what do you think? And that was what began the relationship. And soon we were in frequent communication. And, again, I find this so sad because this is a person, like, I can sense his humanity, right? But he's telling us a story that is easily proven not true. This idea, at least the framing of the story, that they didn't know one another before this falconry day is not true because they did a podcast together a year ago, like an hour-long podcast where it was very clear that Kennedy had read his work and found his analysis around climate, which was less about managing carbon and more about managing other things, which is suited to Web3, of interest and probably useful to him where he needs to go to pivot, to bring together, to turn climate, and environmentalist Bobby into, health freedom Bobby. And that Charles's books, which are, again, based mostly on a lot of work of other economists and other thought leaders who preceded him, but again, dredged back up for popular consumption in this moment as we're being positioned for digital currency, but community-based, decentralized community currency. So the day of falconry being the beginning of the relationship is not true. And yet throughout this, both Kennedy and Eisenstein are going to ask us to be truthful, right? To be moral, to hold us to a higher standard. And so what I'm asking is I'm holding them to this higher standard, right? You're saying you're inviting us into stories, but you're not being truthful, right? And if you were, you wouldn't have framed the story this way, but maybe this is all a fiction, right? Maybe this isn't even real and we're all being just entered into a fiction. But yeah, so essentially the focus was around his book on sacred economics, which is again going to be this digital money backed by things we love. And he imagines that this campaign will be a playground to enact his philosophy in a new practical way. And so what I would say is, if RFK Jr. read Charles's book about sacred economics and wanted to invite him into the playground to try his philosophy out, it doesn't really mesh with an eco-libertarian worldview. It's actually Charles's understanding is much more managed, right? I mean, there's going to be some serendipity in there because that's what the emergent system wants. But Kennedy is appealing to the free market. And Eisenstein's view of UBI and debt jubilees is not that. So they're actually at a fundamental disconnect. And I wonder, do they not see that about each other? Or is just the climate stuff the more convenient aspect? So anyway, he just says that, he's probably not going to be writing as much, but it says this blog will comprise the thoughts of a philosopher who has entered the realm of politics, though not thankfully as a politician. So yeah, he's a storyteller / propagandist. I'm being generous to call him a troubadour. And I think that this idea, again, of the round table, evoking the decentralized autonomous organizations, and again, this is what Zargham is working on, in the same milieu with Will Ruddick and Bernard Lietaer and Jem Bendell and these systems theorists, is to have this internet of impact with token engineering and impact data all running things that represent decentralization, but are actually in many ways very regulated by the rules of the protocol. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a bit, it connects to John Clippinger and Sandy Pentland and this open mustard seed platform. An early example of this was actually something called hub culture that started out in 2002, but I think they were collaborating since 2013 with this guy, Stan Stalnaker. And he was an author of a chapter of the book From Bitcoin to Burning Man. And it was about a digital currency called VEN, V-E-N. And it's interesting now that I think about VEN, when you look at the Cello logo, it's two intersecting circles, which one is green and one is yellow, and it's the Vesica Pisces, right? And it's also a Venn diagram. So it's interesting. I hadn't really made that connection to just now that the digital currency that Stan Stalnaker was using in his hub culture was called VEN. Very early on, again, like 2002, he had been formerly with Time Warner, and he was developing digital currency micropayments in 2007. That's the VEN. So the VEN was 2007. So again, in the lead up to the last economic crash, they had their own private cryptocurrency exchange. They had their own international co-working spaces, and that they were working with this Windhover principle, which is what came out of the open mustard seed, were these Windhover digital identities. And so this is like for the most elite class. And they were using the data that was created by Hub Culture, including later on a active quarantine ally health passport, to feed it into an AI called Zeke. And Zeke, to me, that sort of speaks to Ezekiel's wheel in Revelation. To me, the hub is the same as the donut, and the donut economics is, So the round table and the hub and the cybernetics, this is just the chapter by Stan Stalnaker, Venn and the Nature of Money. And I do think, now that I'm thinking about it, that the Venn diagram is important. But yeah, so they've been working on digital currency for a very long time, and Charles is definitely in the midst of all of that. And in the digital currency, this brings in another character who was at this Bretton Woods 75 event. Her name is Michaela Ulyaru. She's a Romanian scientist specializing in self-organizing systems and blockchain impact. And her hands are she's into everybody's business. But the chapter she wrote from a clip for the book From Bitcoin to Burning Man was on holons and holarchy, which is bottom-up organizing and nested holons. And so I think you can imagine that the current community currencies that are going to be pushed, the digital community currencies that are going to be pushed are like, in a body in this morphogenetic development, you've got, cells that come together to create tissues, that come together to create organs, that come together to create bodies, and then the bodies come together to create societies. And so managing oscillation and time and signal transmission among all of those units is really vital. And so that's why it has to be digital. And if they can transform us into a digital twin, then essentially we don't even have to physically be present. And they don't have to move atoms, which is like material reality. They can just move bits, which is so much more efficient. They can move it, and then they have access to so many more potentialities in terms of cognition and distributed intelligence. If you can shift from material to digital and then move it at the speed of light. And so again, everything is speeding up and becoming more and more complex to the point that like regular people can't even understand what's going on. So anyway, but like I wanted to point out that the holons are also like the round table. So you've got cybernetics, you've got the torus field, you've got the hubs, the wheels. And then the other thing is love. So Charles often talks about love. One of his books is called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. So again, the heart, and I've talked before about the electrical field of the heart and how that's very significant. And that Galia Benardsi, who was who led Bancor with Eyal Herzog, he was the architect of the platform, this liquid token trading, that their first exchange, tokenized exchange, was Lev. And Lev is hearts. And the Lev market was a market targeting moms in Israel to trade off. It was almost like a digital babysitting co-op or something, like domestic work. Like you would trade carpooling or babysitting or cooking for that. So I think it's important that is also the heart. And again, we've got Kate Raworth here, the donut economics, the torus field. And then this is someone that I had come across early on in doing my work looking into the Foundation for Integrated Education with Julia Stulman and Fritz Kunst, this guy Robert Hartman. And Robert Hartman was a strange bird. I need to do a whole presentation on Hartman. His family good. Okay, so hopefully you guys can still see. You're still there? Okay, sorry about that. So Hartman, let me see. Oh gosh. Oh, okay. So he was, so one parent was Catholic, one was Jewish. He went to a school where he wore a hair shirt. He was very devout. He escaped Germany in the lead up to the rise of the Nazis. He went to go work for Disney. And then he became a leading proponent of measuring values. And so I think this is all moving into the happiness stuff called formal axiology and this moral economy that we're moving into that direction. And so he eventually came to the US. He was a visiting professor at MIT, and eventually he ended up at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, which is right outside of Oak Ridge, right? And was a founding member of the Society for General Systems Research. But he chose the name Hartman. It wasn't his original name because of the heart. And so again, he was essentially the father of the 401k and profit sharing. And so this idea of linking your values to your money goes all the way back to Robert Hartman. Okay, so that's, you know what, I'm going to just see if I can, there's a sort of an odd thing on my screen. I don't know. I guess you guys aren't seeing it, so maybe it's not a problem. Okay, all right, so I guess that's mostly it on the love stuff. But I think, again, we've got the falconry going on. We've got the troubadour who's going to tell us some stories. We've got the love, and so we've got the love stuff going on. And then, so I'm going to play a couple clips from setting up the storytelling part. And then later on at the Bretton Woods 75 talk that Charles gave, at the end there was a discussant, and her name is Carolyn Finney, who is like an environmentalist whose focus is on like Black women in the environment. And she had also done backpacking in Africa and Tibet or Nepal. And so she has a certain kind of outlook. And so she was the discussant. And in his talk, Eisenstein kept talking about one of his main framing things was this musical chairs, and that there weren't enough chairs. And at one point, Carolyn said, Charles, I just don't think, it's not that Black people need more chairs. I think maybe we just shouldn't even be in this game. And while I sort of disagree with some other aspects of what she said later, the two of them said about trust and transparency, which is sort of alluding to blockchain, I thought that was a really good point. Because if what Charles is doing is like trying to get more chairs for the game, that represents his connections to Cello. And Carolyn's saying, like, there are other ways of knowing and being, so maybe we just shouldn't even be in this game. Okay, so here's Galea speaking about the importance of storytelling.
Because in the first chapter, he talks about how humans...
Wait a minute, I'm going to move this over to full screen, sorry. Okay. Whoops. All right.
Are different than apes, essentially, and other animals in the animal kingdom, and we're the same in many, many ways. We procreate, we have families, we do things together, we protect, we eat, we groom, but there's a fundamental way that humans are different from all the animals that came before us. And that thing that we do that's totally unique is we tell stories. We tell each other stories, we imagine stories, and we create consensus around stories that allow us to organize in increasingly greater and more complex ways. So a good example of this is if you put 100,000 apes in Times Square, you'd probably get violence and chaos. But if you put 100,000 people in Times Square, we know how to handle that. Why? Because we have stories like Walk on Green and Stop on Red, and this is where the people go, and this is where the cars go. And these stories allow us to coexist and collaborate, hopefully, in greater numbers over time. Money is one of our greatest stories, one of the greatest stories that people have told ourselves and each other since the beginning of mass collaboration. Because in the first...
All right, so money is a story. And so that's an important piece. And then I'm going to scroll on to what Charles says about telling a new story about money.
Magic. And of course, the power of a system of ritual, and I don't want to reduce it to this, but much of the power of a system of ritual depends on the stories, the meanings, and the agreements that symbolic system encodes. So basically, this is pretty obvious, I think, that money is a story. It is just such a set of agreements. That is incredibly liberating because if the story isn't working, in theory, stories are created by human beings. Actually, that's not quite true. It's more the opposite. But let's just say that stories create human beings. But let's just say that for now, that stories are created by human beings, and we could create a new story. All of the things that we see as real, the entire money system, $20 trillion of debt or whatever, these are human creations. These are stories. If we had a Carrington event, a solar coronal mass ejection that fried all electronics, there would not be any money anymore. No more money. So I want to explore a little bit about how the story of money could change.
All right. And so, all right, let me just escape here. All right. So those two things, the importance of story and inviting people into the story. And that's that money is a story. And I think, Jason's been spending a lot of time, that's really his wheelhouse, is understanding the nature of money. And that money is a coordinating mechanism, right, for this emergent behavior. And so we're in the process of changing the story. And I think Charles is clearly a good storyteller. I mean, if you look at the Substack comments, I forgot to go through this, but, there were hundreds of comments at the time. I don't know. Let me just see how many are. Almost 500 comments. So I don't know. That seems like a lot. I scammed through a lot of them at the time. Many hope, joy. There were some people who were concerned about RFK Jr.'s climate position. There were some who were concerned about his affiliation with Robert Malone. There was some concern about crypto. Lots of people said it was exciting. Some people were like, oh, it's a psyop like Bernie. People who generally distrust the system. Some people are like, no, I'm definitely like switching parties to join the Kennedy Democrats, and that they appreciated Charles for his honest writing, right? And again, that's the presumption that what he's doing is telling the truth as opposed to telling a story. And I would say, I think what Charles is doing as a philosopher is telling a story, which may or may not always actually align with what other people might consider the truth. So going through the comments again, Steve Kirsch, no surprise, he was in the comments. Oh, this is awesome. Thank you for doing this. I know RFK Jr. well, duh, right? And he's awesome because he's a truth seeker. I think he'll be the best president we ever had in our history. Good move. And then again, here's the glad to hear an honest philosopher is joining the political team. And, here's another person. So this person follows my work and they're saying, well, Allison documents, let's see, RFK Jr. has very questionable ties to the global technocrat criminals, as Allison McDowell ably documents in Wrench in the Gears. But he's saying crucial truths that must be said and heard by the public that no other prominent political figure is saying. He is by far the best prospect out there, and his family/fame gives him cred, blah, 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 blah. So on the one hand, the work that I do, if you reduce it to questionable ties to global technocrat criminals, that's not what I'm saying. Like, that's not how I frame this. I don't frame it like that. What I'm talking about is systems, right? Now, this is someone who's playing a role. I think if what you said was, I'm not sure about RFK Jr. He seems to have some contradictions, like hiring a former Pfizer representative to be the COO of Children's Health Defense, or he doesn't want to share who his donors are to Children's Health Defense and it has a $60 million budget, or he seems to be promoting drugs that are being linked to Pay for Success finance. I don't think any of those things fall under ties to global technocrat criminals. Like, to me, I appreciate that someone did want to bring my research into it, but it's inaccurate, right? And at this point, someone who follows my work should know enough to make a more accurate statement than that, right? These vague glossing overs are not helping. But then to go on and say he has these problems, but like, what is this least worst or something like that? But he's saying crucial truths. And what I'm saying is the crucial truths that he's saying is that we need a decentralized digital money democracy. And have we agreed that that's what we want? I don't think we have. I don't think we've carefully considered what all of the implications of that are, right? And so it kind of hurts my heart to see that when I get brought into the conversation, it's both inaccurate and then essentially someone has just thrown it out the door like it doesn't matter, like none of this work I'm doing matters. It hasn't informed what they're looking at all. Here's someone, oh yeah, remember Obama made a lot about hope and change, but hey, maybe this time, we'll be successful, right? And then here's another person. Great, Charles, I would have given Steve Kirsch $2,500 for a place at the table in Boston when Bobby gave his nomination speech, but I didn't have the funds. Okay, so $2,500, so much for the people, right? I'm sure Steve can pay a lot of stuff. So anyway, like, he's a storyteller, right? He's a storyteller and he's telling stories and then people want to hear the story. People want to buy into the story that they're comfortable with, that doesn't make them work too hard. And I that's what I'm seeing sort of in these Substack comments. Okay, so then let's see. I'm going to hop over here. I want to just I have things tucked in all of these different places. I'm like there's Charles and Carolyn Finney and in the wing chairs at the Mount Washington. Here, I think Rodrigo gave this in a comment, which was really helpful. I think I'd seen this writing, but I didn't read the caption. That this is Galea, it's Galea, not Galila, Galea Benartzi of Bancor, giving Bernard Lietaer, who was the creator of the euro and the promoter of complementary currency, a book of Eisenstein's Climate: A New Story, and it says by one of our favorite authors, right? So Charles is right in the middle of all of the Bancor programs, right? The digital coordination. And I'm just trying to see where he says that he's with Cello. I think, it's frustrating because on it used to be on their website, and then they took it off. Oh, here it is. They used to have a list of advisors, and Charles was featured. I mean, there were many advisors. He wasn't the only advisor by any shot, but Cello still does have a tweet out there from March of 2020, so literally a week after lockdowns, that we are excited to formally welcome, this is Cello, Charles Eisenstein as an advisor to Cello. So, just to document. And being an advisor to Cello is just like getting more chairs for the Black community, right? To have a more even chance in the token engineered economy. So I'm going to just play this short clip from Carolyn, and you can listen to that.
90 chairs. And, it's like, gosh, I think the white people are getting too many chairs. Although there's, I don't know, maybe 80% of us are white people here. So imagine that part of the circle where the white people are, that's only missing a few chairs. And the part of the circle where the Black people are, that's missing a lot of the chairs. So ideology of racial equality says we gotta mix it up and make not enough. We have to make the chairs equally available to everybody. Everybody should have at least a fair opportunity, an equal chance to go for one of these fake chairs. But a deeper level of transformation would be to say, well, why are there chairs missing in the first place? So if we take that for granted, if we take 10 chairs are missing for granted, then it's always going to be a game of us versus them. Or it intensifies those.
So can I offer also, I was thinking about what I heard you say around the margin to center. For me, the margin to center is a really limiting model because the center, for me, what's innovative and different often happens on the edge. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm thinking about the musical chair metaphor. Why do we even need chairs? Is it possible that there are, some of the conversation I'm hearing in the past day or two is that how I'm interpreting it is that there's different ways of knowing and being in the room that we may not know how to tap into, but it's there. And how do we allow space for that to happen? The possibility that we may not need the chairs. What if we didn't? So it wasn't about, we got to get 10 more for you, or 10 more for whoever so we can fit everybody in, because maybe the circle that we're sitting in is not the best circle for us to be sitting in the first place.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. With that. That's the question for me. Like, are we sitting in a circle? Whose circle? What is the game, right? And I would say, for me, and this has just sort of come, occurred to me, and again, the whole thing of musical chairs, especially like when I'm looking at the round table in the nights, like you can sort of picture them running around the chairs or whatever. The musical chairs is like, what if the chairs are your wallet, right? Like what if that is the thing that you're attached to? And our wallet is what's going to transform us from physical material, like from atoms, that are into the bits, which will be transmissible globally. Like globalization is about to be put on turbo drive, right? As we get all turned into digital avatars and sent around, like with the Japan Moonshot Project. And with that comes life lived at such a fast speed, the speed of a machine, that it's going to be totally dehumanizing, right? And I think Carolyn's point of like, do we want to even be sitting in these chairs? Maybe these chairs are not the place for us. And I think that she's entirely correct in that. And so what Charles is offering is, I think you could swap out a digital wallet for a chair. And that's the hat that he wears when he's an advisor to Cello, is that if everyone has a digital wallet, then you can have a digital twin to be in the circle of the cybernetic game board, right? But we don't have to do that, right? Like we could actually, there's still time to say no to the Web3 protocol layer. So I think that gets to most of those things. Okay, so then I'm gonna go down to this section, okay, the coronation. So his most recent book, so he has a book about sacred economics, he has a book about climate, he has a book about worlds and love and different things. This one, I'm not sure when it came out. It's named after an essay that he wrote in 2020 called The Coronation. Now, I will say, like within this frame, like the introduction at Bancor or at the Bretton Woods 75 summit, essentially what he's saying is that like they're just waiting for the next crisis to bring these marginal experimental systems to the center, right? And so, and I think that would have been the lockdowns, and so. A lot of people have linked this idea of corona to crown, to, you know, the bloodlines, to the royals, to the Bank of England and all of this thing. But I have sort of been thinking about this, like the book that I've been listening to while I've been working on my quilt is this idea of distributed cognition and about the octopus. And I'm trying to see where, let's see. Oh gosh, my problem is I set up too many maps and then I wasn't able to organize it all very well. But in the book with Adrian Tchaikovsky, Children of Ruin, I think, he was essentially framing this idea of the crown. Yeah, sorry, it was, the crown, the brain of the octopus is the goal setting, and the reach is the arm and the tentacle. And so I think that this decentralized currency system it's not simply control, it's control towards creating a super intelligence, like a distributed cognition super intelligence in a coordinated fashion. So not just coordinating economic markets or coordinating supply chains, but coordinating things on a more sophisticated level than we could ever imagine. And so this idea of the crown, now I thought that this was what other people called it. I guess maybe it's only Tchaikovsky calls it a crown and a reach. To me, I thought it was like that was what the scientists called it. But when I saw coronation, this is what I'm thinking, that what Eisenstein is advancing is this idea of a mechanism that will create a steady state economy that will advance this aspect of the program. So, but it has to happen through the distributed computing. So here, I'm going to play this clip that is about him needing a crisis to bring the ideas to the center.
This is not a matter of being a little more clever, finding a different fuel source to maintain and continue the extraction and the domination and the paving over of Earth. But it is an invitation into a different relationship. No longer the dominator relationship. Now I want to bridge this back to money, because that's what Bretton Woods was about, and ask what kind of money system would be consistent with a story of interbeing. it doesn't do to fight the power of money in our attempt to create a more beautiful world, in the attempt to bring about ecological healing. So often it seems like a battle. And that's because it is, given the nature of money as we know it. But as I said, money is a story. And what new story of money could we tell? Now, even though I disagreed with pretty much everything Larry Summers said, I also feel like he is an elder who's lived a long time, and there's always something. Anytime you write somebody off, that's part of the dominator paradigm too. And one thing that I took that I really liked was the metaphor of the blank page. It's easy to create something new, but if the page is already heavily written, you can't really make that much of it. You can maybe just, adjust some words and things. You can't do that much with it. So a lot of what I'm going to say, I'm not going to say, okay, here's the design, but it's more of sending a post to the future. When that page is thrown in the trash, when there is a massive crisis, then the unthinkable becomes common sense. And so I want to inform the common sense and send a message to the future. And many people in this room are doing that as well, not just through your ideas, but through your organizations, through your enterprises that are perhaps kind of marginal these days.
Now, there was quite a heavy presence of blockchain people at this event.
Waiting for the center to disintegrate so that what was in the margins can rush in.
Yeah, so waiting for the center to disintegrate. So this is like a planned demolition. And so if you were ever wondering sort of at his positions around the lockdowns and the nature of that, then I think this says a lot. Again, this event was in July of 2019.
Islands of the future in an ocean of the past.
Right.
This is not...
All right, so I'm just okay. So we've got the coronation. This idea of normality has been stretched. This is a March 2020, right? So this is just at the very beginning. Shall we undo its dangling braids further to see what we can weave? COVID demonstrates the power of our collective will when we agree on what is important, right? So he was seeing this as the next phase of what was coming. And so, again, I'm just thinking of the coronation as the crown of the octopus and distributed cognition. And one of the entities, when I was putting together like the token engineering, I came across this thing for this metagame that the Zargam was involved with a little bit. And it's about like this coordinated distributed computing gaming system. And essentially, like the icon for that was an octopus brain, and like it was it's I guess sort of the octopus is an icon for the decentralization, distributed cognition, and let's see, the biomechanics in the wild, 9 brains are better than 1, how the nervous system works, and again, I think we're considered parts of the nervous system of this superorganism, like this global superorganism. So this is an image of the huge brain of the octopus with all these lobes and refined sensory systems. And again, Cliff and I did that talk about the outside-in robot, won't you be my sensor? And the idea of layering intelligences, both human and non-human. So this is an image from an article from the winner, from a magazine in the winter of 2021, New Media, Journal of New Media Caucus, where they're talking about layering in essentially human intelligence and slime mold intelligence over texts. I'll just read this little bit. It's the article's title was "Case Study: Remixing Knowledge with Layered Intelligences" by Lucy Hung Solomon, Caesar Bao, and Caesar and Lois, an artist collective consisting of Lucy and Caesar. Okay. In degenerative cultures, the living organism Physarum polycephalum, partners with an artificial intelligence that compiles and corrupts an archive of human text. In the iterative art installation, which incorporates the growth cycles of microbial organisms, protists, as well as fungi, cover up and effectively remix human texts. Human knowledge contained within the philosophy books used in the project become the substrate for organic growth. The living organisms grow over an actual book, and the AI, referred to as a digital fungus, corrupts texts on the internet. The artists' experiment which links microbial growth logic to artificial intelligence is one step in rethinking how human knowledge may become layered and ultimately corrupted and rerouted, a forking of sorts, through integration with non-human logic systems, including microbiological and artificial intelligences. By orienting this work to remix theory, the article offers the hypothesis of a multi-species recombination that could, in utopian terms, reformulate the epistemological basis of modernity. And that's a mouthful. But I guess what I'm trying to convey is, Leo has talked about LedGuard and this idea of digital wallets for animals. And so I feel like this is all part of creating virtual spaces with virtual micropayments. And the payments aren't really even going to be money as we currently understand them, but like exchanging signals of contributions and blending all of these intelligences. But it can't be done. Well, I'm not saying, I think we have a natural way of accessing, the collective consciousness of the world without a digital substrate. But the crown of the octopus, whatever is doing the goal setting, isn't able to do that and manipulate it and set the goals unless it happens through the digital protocol, which is the Web3 layer. And so in order for us to function with other intelligences in a way that's visible to the machine, the Web3 part has to be installed. And so art projects like this are sort of a part of it. And so what I feel like we're moving towards, and this is something I'm going to talk about next, is there's a discussion. I talked about the Hollands before. The Michaela Ulyaru talked about organic governance through the logic of holonic systems, that the Hollands will be part of it. I just have some images from this, but just talking about bottom up and organized cooperation. This is why the commons conversation is so important. This is why the decentralization thing is so important. This is why the libertarian thing is so important, and this idea of agents and decision theory. And I think that 3 years of totalitarianism was the setup for us to transition to this phase of the game, to this next act of the play, or this new, reconstituting the team for a new game. This is what's happening. And the first thing had to come first. They had to have the totalitarianism to create the psychological conditioning to accept the next phase of a tokenized commons. But this is where it's going, and it's going to be managed as through these circuits, different kinds of tokenized circuitry. Let's see. And I had this in my map before, talking about collective intelligence and cognitive societies, cognitive capitalism, Melanie Swan's cloud minds, that this would happen through social service payment systems with different team coordination through the tokens. And this would happen through stigmergy. And, I almost forgot. Let me see. Just with Charles, I forgot to mention, I think it's further down. So again, Eisenstein, the name means iron stone. And I mean, it feels like all of this is sort of planned, this is sort of, there's this symbology embedded in this. So you've got the falconry, you've got the Camelot, you've got the troubadour, you've got the ironstone guy. And then of course, iron, the Earth's core, I guess it says along with nickel and sulfur, is the core that creates the magnetic field of the planet. And so I feel like, Eisenstein is set up to be sort of a magnetic personality to pull people into the story of the new kind of money, the money that will coordinate us through commoning into this position of being a lover to the earth, and move us towards the noosphere and the emergence. And someone passed this along to me this morning, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to definitely incorporate this. But it was this idea of artificial pheromones that I've talked about before with swarm robotics. And they were trying to figure out how do you create a biochemical pheromone for robots, like for machines. And so they've been trying out a lot of different things. And in this one, they were using magnetism and ferrofluids, which are some sort of carrier fluid with tiny iron filings, like nanoparticulates of iron, that would guide the swarm robots. And so I feel like this stigmergy is something that's like that Eisenstein in some ways embodies, and maybe that's what, again, Bobby is looking for in his campaign is a magnetic personality that can set the goals and let the tentacles of the octopus figure things out. Anyway, so this just is the map that was showing the different ways of like the stigmergy in swarm organizing. And I talked about that a lot with the Celia Farber Substack and the swarm and the ant computer. But I think people's personalities and the way they tell stories are also stigmergic. And so someone had sent me a couple of clips about this idea of self-organized criticality and nervous systems. And I thought it was really interesting because they're looking at the way the mind works. This guy Vervaeke, John Vervaeke, who's a professor of cognitive neuroscience at University of Toronto. And he's an interesting guy. Perception, cognition, and cognitive neuroscience is his shtick. And he's very interested in this idea of relevance realization. And for me, it actually really made a lot of sense because I feel like we're navigating all this information. We have a certain frame. We have a certain goal. Hopefully it's a goal that we've come to internally from our own being that's not just been assigned to us. And we're trying to sort out the information that comes into us through all of our senses and through all of our social networks and to sort it into understanding our own story, right? Our story of how we're understanding the world. And he calls this relevance realization. And we're doing it at a time when there's so much information, we have limited attention, we're trying to figure out how to organize our working memory, and in what to put into long-term memory and then how to access these long-term memories to find the patterns. And I think that's what they're hoping to replace us with AI. I don't think that they can do that. The AI is really good at like holding the long-term memories, but I don't think it's good at some of the other stuff. So Vervaeke is talking about this criticality and let's see, distributed cognition and myth. I can't remember exactly what this one is about. I have a couple of clips from him, and then someone else had sent me this, and I cannot claim to have delved deeply into this, but The Self-Organizing Universe, published by Robert Maxwell of Pergamon Press, of course, that's talking about that, and then I think it's paired to me like with this Handbook of Human Computation. But if you can, like there's emergent behavior and I've talked about this before, at the border of order and chaos. And I'm going to pull up this descent map real quick. And this goes with the network state. Like they're trying to get us into this network state to create emergent behaviors. And they're like creating records, they're creating all of these digital wallets and and then within the futarchy, the new remade democracy that we're going to be betting on outcomes of policy. This will be happening through protocols. There will be fitness benchmarks tied to sustainability. And from this, there will be these complex emergent systems like coming out. And it's at the border of chaos and order that is where the interesting stuff happens. So I think that if we imagine that this gamified life of self-actualization, right, in terms of some sort of supercomputer game, this emergent man that Julia Stulman, and Irvin Laszlo talked about, that will be emergent in this gamified, this is the metagame what in the hell is metagame? Metagame is, this way of coordinating people in the commons towards a common goal, with our wallets and our guilds. And again, we've got guilds, so we're back to the Middle Ages again. That it's to create something emergent, right? But in some ways, that might be kind of interesting, but we weren't ever asked. Like, we don't have enough information to give informed consent. We don't. And a lot of this stuff is being perpetrated on vulnerable communities, children, the global South. They certainly can't give consent, right? And they're coming from disadvantaged, positions already. But I think that the currency is about keeping us at this border of emergent behavior. So I'm just going to play these two clips from Vervaeke. This first one is about distributed cognition and myth. And I think a lot of the framing around RFK
I think most of our
Jr.
problem solving
is linked to myth. I think a lot of this is myth making. Oh, whoops. Okay. Sorry. I thought.
Done in distributed cognition. Look around. You didn't make this equipment. You didn't build this place. You didn't invent this language that we're both sharing, et cetera, et cetera. And now there's more specific and precise experimental evidence coming out. Let's take a standard task that people, reasoning task. I wanted to do the details. It's called the Wason selection task. And you give it to people, highly educated psychology students, premier universities across the world. We've been doing it since the 60s. It replicates and replicates. And only 10% of the people get it right. You put them in a group of 4 and you allow them to talk to each other. The success rate goes to 80%. That's just one example of a phenomenon that's coming to the fore. We've participated in conversations that took on a life of their own and took us both in directions we did not anticipate, afforded us insights that we could not have had on our own. And we don't have to have come to an agreement, but we were both moved and we were both drawn into insight. And we feel like, wow, that was one of the best moments of my life, because we feel how that it introduced us to a capacity for tapping into a flow state within distributed cognition that puts us into a deeper relationship with ourselves, with another person, and potentially with the world. That's what I mean by dialogos. And so for me, I think dialogos is more important, that I don't think mythos is, I think mythos is really important. I think these kinds of narratives are really important. But I think this ability to connect together in distributed cognition, collective intelligence, and cultivate a shared flow state within that collective intelligence so it starts to ramp up, perhaps towards collective wisdom. I think that's more important, because I think that's the basin within which the myths and the rituals are ultimately created and when they function. Like a myth is like a public dream. It depends on distributed cognition, and it depends on people.
And I just want to point out, like, the Kennedy legacy is a myth, is a mythology. It is a public dream. I think that that's really important to understand. This candidacy is being positioned in a very sophisticated way. And I think that indicates that there's a lot of resources behind it, right? And then the question is, what are those resources and what are they driving for? Like, where do they hope that this myth is going to take us?
People enacting it and getting into mutual flow states. So that communitas, that's Victor Turner's phrase, and he specifically linked it to flow, and I study flow scientifically, that within distributed cognition as the home, as the generator of mythos and ritual, and those are bound together as well. I think that's fundamentally correct.
All right. So, sorry, I forgot to transition before. So, I want to point out, just when I'm looking at, like, the situation, right? We've got this gamified life, self-actualization, evolution. even a lot of the stuff that Charles talks about here, like if you took it at face value, it sounds good. What does not enter into the conversation, though, is an analysis of who holds the power, right? And I think, I understood going into lockdowns this issue of power, because I was looking at the financial system, I was looking at social impact. I could see that the concentration of wealth, especially starting to be in hands of like AI run portfolios, was not human. And there is a vast inequality of wealth distribution and power, right? And so we can paint the prettiest picture that we want about the future our hearts know is possible or what have you. But if what we're doing is advancing solutions that don't take into account the power dynamic, I think it's very misguided, because to think that all of a sudden, like the BlackRocks, the State Street Capitals, the Vanguards of the world are just going to be like turned into benevolent philanthropists, I don't think that that's accurate. Like, and that's the frustrating part for me, is like some of this idea of collaboration, like I've benefited from that. Sadly, because it's not real and it's only online, some of those collaborations ended up being with people who didn't turn, like, either they never were the person I thought they were, or they turned out to be some other kind of person, right? And it's difficult to collaborate, like, not in physical proximity with someone. But even so, like, I've had revelations, I've had really interesting insights, I've had like good opportunities too. It's just, it feels very treacherous, because we don't know what we're dealing with. And so to invite people into these flow states online, it is exciting, because I think many of us felt this way at the beginning, the first 6 months of the lockdowns before, like we found people, right? We found people that helped us make sense of what we were experiencing in a way that we maybe couldn't find other places. And it was very rewarding. And then eventually many of those relationships deteriorated into like noise or vitriol or other kinds of things. And so, it's a nuanced discussion to talk about like this self-organizing criticality. I think that they want to do it digitally, because I think, one, again, it becomes more machine readable and machine capturable, and to add into the programming. But it vastly increases the number of potential collaborators you have if you can tap into the whole world. And eventually we have, automatic natural language processing, that sort of thing. But it is very treacherous. I mean, I say that from my own personal experience. And yeah, so here is another clip of him. He's going to be talking about the self-organizing criticality. This is for Vaki.
Increasing evidence that when neurons fire in synchrony together, they're doing something like compression. So if you give, for example, somebody a picture that they can't quite make out, and you're looking at how the brain is firing, the areas of the visual cortex, for example, if it's a visual picture, are firing sort of asynchronously. And then when the person gets it and go, aha, you get large areas that fire in synchrony together. Interestingly, there's even increasing evidence that when human beings are cooperating in joint attention and joint activity, their brains are getting into patterns of synchrony.
So I think that's what this community currency is. I think the community currency, and I'm gonna show in a minute, like some Will Ruddick, who is connected with Jem Bendell in the complementary currency space, was involved in a project during lockdowns to help. And it's interesting because he traveled because it was there in person, doing digitizing the Hong Kong time banks. And it just occurred to me this morning, I'm like, time is also oscillation. And oscillation is central to cell division and morphology and morphic fields and embryology, like how things emerge. So like using a community currency attached to a time banking system where the things that you're banking are things that are connected to culture and society and quote unquote volunteering, which I think feeds again into the social prescribing. that this is about coordinating some sort of emergent behavior and distributed cognition collectively through money and time and tokens. And again, I get it. Like sometimes we have these exchanges that are really rewarding, right? And I think that's a lot of times what keeps people engaged in social media when it's not, the whole trauma stuff, that it's actually personal. When you have these connections, what feel like authentic connections to people online, thinking through ideas and trying to solve problems. I'm just not sure that in the long run that's where we want to go.
So that opens up the possibility for a very serious account of distributed cognition. I'll come back to that much later. Now, what we know what's going on in the cortex, right? And this is the point that's very important. This is scale invariant. What that means is at many levels of analysis, you will see this process happening. Why is that important? Well, if you remember, relevance realization has to be something that's happening very locally, very globally. It has to be happening pervasively throughout all of your cognitive processing. So the fact that this process I'm describing is also scale invariant in the brain is suggestive that it can be implementing relevance realization. Okay, now what happens is at many levels of analysis, what you have is, right, you have this pattern where neurons are firing in synchrony, and then they become asynchronous, and then they fire in synchrony, and then they become asynchronous, and they're doing this in a rapidly oscillating manner. So this is an instance of what's called...
And that's the order and chaos. So you get new information, it comes together, and then it expands apart, and it comes together and expands apart.
Called self-organizing criticality. It's a particular kind of opponent processing, a particular kind of self-organization. So we're getting more precision in our account of the self-organizing nature, potentially of relevance realization. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this first, and then we'll come back to its particular instantiation in the brain. So self-organizing criticality, this goes...
Now, so he's talking about the brain, but he's also saying that it's at all of these different levels, from like small levels up to global levels. So I think you could apply the same thing to us as agents in the ant computer or the world sensorium.
Originally back to the work of Purbach. So let's say you have grains of sand falling, like in an hourglass, and initially it's random, well, random from our point of view, of where, right, within a zone, individual grains will end up somewhere in that zone. We don't know where because they'll bounce and all that. But over time, what happens, because there's a virtual engine there, friction and gravity, but also the bounce, right? So the bouncing introduces variation, the friction and, the gravity.
So they want the variation, and this is what I want to sort of emphasize, is that as much as it's this Hegelian dialectic, right? They're using the authoritarian to advance the decentralized, right? They're playing one against the other. And I did sort of see something in the chat about like the mark of the beast or buying and selling. I want to emphasize that if we limit it to the financial, we're missing a whole huge part, which is the democracy. And from what I can tell within the RFK Jr. campaign, it's a lot about emphasizing democracy, and those democracy are going to be tokens too. So I would not get super only hung up on that one thing, because the complexity theory, the emergence is going to come from all different kinds of tokens that are going to be tied in with the Web3. So I think, again, you can hold your spiritual practice and however you hold it, but if there is something bigger going on within the protocol layer that goes well beyond the buying and selling part.
Put constraint, and what happens is the sand grains self-organize. There's no little elf that runs in and shapes the sand into a mold. It self-organizes into a mound like that. And it keeps doing this and keeps doing this.
And that's what the community currencies are going to be for. They are going to say that they are self-organizing. Now, again, it's going to be centralized decentralization, because at the very top, the BIS is going to be running the ultimate ledger, like the reconciliation ledger. So somebody's going to be at the crown setting the goal of the, the octopus head, that the tentacles of the various communities and the holons are organizing themselves. But so it's not really decentralized, but at least for the way people will experience it largely will be that there is choice, because what they need is the randomness to actually access the emergent behavior. And, and I'm just gonna put myself up here. So I think too, part of what I've been trying to navigate with the stuff about the AI, like the sole focus on AI as the threat and the chat GPT, I think that is on purpose. Again, I think in many ways that the fact that people are so focused on the AI means that they're not looking at the smart contract layer and the protocols. And so I don't think that the machine can actually... I'm thinking about the singularity, and I've said this before, but I just want to restate. It may not be how we've been taught to think about it. It may not be that the singularity is a machine attaining consciousness, but it may actually be that a mechanical system is able to coordinate natural life on Earth through these tokenizations, through the satellite surveillance, through the nanotechnology, to coordinate it such that it uses us as a tool, and we become embedded together. And that's something that Charles talks about a lot in other aspects of his talk, is like the interconnectedness. He talks about the interbeingness. And again, I'm not saying that we're not interconnected. I'm not trying to say that I can see the connections, but in this line of thought, this idea of a machine creating a unified substrate of all of natural life that it can conduct through managed electrical circuits towards some task. And I don't know what the task is, but I think what the task is, it involves something that it cannot create on its own, because it doesn't have a soul, and it doesn't have creativity, and it doesn't have love. And so it's like squeezing us in ways to accomplish something that it could not accomplish otherwise. And that accomplishment is something that is supposed to happen collectively, which is why we're being engineered as social insects. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I'm feeling about it. So get back to Mr.
Now, at some point, right, it enters a critical phase. Criticality means the system is close to, right, is potentially breaking down. See, when it's self-organized like this, it demonstrates a high degree of order. Order means that as this mound takes shape, the position of any one grain of sand gives me a lot of information about where the other grains are likely to be, because they're so tightly organized. It's highly ordered. But then what happens is that order breaks down, right? And you get an avalanche. It avalanches down. And the system, and if this is too great, if the criticality becomes too great, the system will collapse. And so there are people that argue that civilizations collapse.
Okay, and I will just mention too, that so the collapse narrative, this is really central to Jem Bendell, the Extinction Rebellion, this woman Joanna Macy, Rianne Einsler, this idea that, again, the whole Greta narrative is that collapse is imminent. We have to do all these things because collapse is imminent. Now, I would say that there have always been engineered collapses to clear the deck and start over. And Jason has, done a really good job in his presentation about Ukraine, and, that being a setup for the new form of all sorts of digital pilots, digital government, digital identity, emerging technology implementation. So the collapses have always been planned, but I think that with this granular control grids, whether that's, how our digital identity through our government access, through the money, through the Internet of Things sensor tokens, that they'll have a lot finer control of how the collapses happen. And so I think he'll talk in a minute about these phase transitions of order like ice is a crystalline structure, and in that form, it's the structure is very orderly. So like he said, when it's in order, 1 point of sand can tell you a lot in relation to all of the other grains of sand. Progressively less ordered is water, and then even more chaotic is gas. But there are phase transitions between each of those. And it's in the phase transition that is where the emergent stuff happens. And so I feel like that these data analysts and the prediction markets and the bonding curves and the token engineering are going to be meant to keep us in some sort of quote unquote sweet spot. Keep us, probably the us that I'm thinking of will be like our digital twins, to keep us in some sort of sweet spot to maximize the like synchronistic neural firing, of the story, to get at the whatever intellectual or cognitive or collective unconscious or psychic properties that we have that it wants. Okay, so let me just go back to that.
Due to what's called general systems failure, which is that these entropic forces, right, are actually overwhelming the structure of the system, and the system just collapses. So collapse is a possibility with criticality. However, what can happen is the following. The sand spreads out due to the avalanche, and then that introduces variation, important changes in the structural functional organization of the sand mound. Because now what happens is, right, there's a bigger base, and what that means is now a new mound forms, and it can go much higher than the previous mound. It has an emergent capacity that didn't exist in the previous system. And then it cycles like this. Now, at any point, again, there's no T-loss to this. At any point, the criticality can overwhelm the system and it can collapse. At any point, the criticality within you can overwhelm the system and you can die, right? But what you see, right, is you see the brain cycling in this manner, self-organizing criticality. The neurons structure together, that's like the mound forming, and then they go asynchronous. This is sometimes even called the neural avalanche, right? And then they reconfigure into a new synchrony, and then they go asynchronous. So do you see what's happening here? What's happening here is the brain is oscillating like this, and what it's doing with self-organizing criticality is it's doing data compression, and then it does a neural avalanche, which opens up, introduces variation into the system, which allows a new structure to reconfigure that is momentarily fitted to the situation. It breaks up, right? Now,
so think about like this with the idea of the Hong Kong Time Bank. Let me just, so the Hong Kong Time Bank, which is something that, again, Will Ruddick worked on and Michael Zargham. So during lockdown, they took an informal ledger economy and they digitized it, and then they made it more and more efficient, which again fits in with sort of the anarcho-capitalist libertarian ethos and the agent-based gamification. But it's a time bank of sort of social behaviors. And so when you're talking about neural firing, like new information coming out, and then it being integrated, and then getting a new resting state, and then sort of fragmenting with new information, and then having it processed, and then coming together. Oscillation that he's talking about is time. Like time is this oscillation. And so I keep thinking, like, I know at some point, like Bantam Joe online, he had said, well, isn't it interesting that Facebook wants to give you lots of friends that aren't anywhere near where you live? You're at a distance, right? And on one hand, you could say, oh, well, that maybe that's about like, because so then you won't get together in person and maybe organize something and do something together, but that you're at a distance from one another. And then also the whole trust thing becomes more complicated. But think about inserting new information. So if you've got digital twins, models of everyone and their intellectual and cognitive and soft skills, and then they're going to be predictions about throwing people together, right? And what will happen when you bring certain kinds of people together. And I think that also relates to all the changes that we're seeing in education, right? Oh, you have to do education online. Oh, you need to be a global citizen. Oh, you need to hop in a VR headset and do interchanges with people from all over the world. And again, not that I'm trying to be like, I'm not nationalist in any way, but if you understand it from the system, if the system is trying to maximize this serendipity, this synergy, then to throw in new interesting bits of information to see what they can catalyze, and then have it processed and integrated, and then do it over and over and over again, and maybe faster and faster and faster. Like, I feel like that is sort of what is emerging from this networked world sensorium that we're amassing into. But I don't think that our participation in this is going to be, again, with our informed consent. I don't think that we are going to, for the most part, gleefully enter into this process, into this game that they're creating, because we are literally, we have whatever the, automated luxury communism that they're talking about, or like that all of our, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of our needs are met. So we're just like hanging out, being our best selves, doing our own intellectual, work, because the robots are doing everything else. I don't really think that it's going to be nearly that seamless. And I don't really think that, if, again, having BlackRock or people in charge, that their goal is to, give everyone their optimum happiness quotient. Like, much more likely that they're going to have everyone in a flow state headset in their micro apartment, right? Conditioned on appropriate like health monitoring status. So anyway, I'll keep going.
Do you see what it's doing? It's constantly, moment by moment, this is happening in milliseconds. It's evolving its fittedness. It's complexifying its structural functional organization. It is doing, right, compression and particularization, which means it's constantly, moment by moment, evolving its sensory motor fittedness to the environment. It's doing relevance realization, I would argue.
And I would say compression, there's probably like econophysics aspect to the compression, like that you could compress an economy to create a certain outcome. I mean, just like shock doctrine, right? And the boys from Chicago boys in Chile, they've often done economic interventions, but this could actually happen. Like, you could probably have something happening on like a weekly nuanced basis if they wanted to.
Now, what does that mean? Well, one thing we should be careful of when I'm doing this, again, I'm using words and gestures and of course to convey and make sense, but right, what you have to understand is this is happening at myriad of levels, right? There's this self-organizing criticality doing this fittedness at this level, and it's interacting with another one doing it at this level.
So again, this is the Holland conversation at all of the levels. Like, that's the Holland. So when Galia Benartzi says, oh, you need a community currency to manage your PTA, or you need a community currency to manage your church or your soccer league, or it's these tiny levels, right? The tiny levels of organization. And then we're going to have token voting for your borough. And then we're going to have this other thing for the next layer and the next layer. That is the integration at all of the different layers that's happening. I think that's how it's supposed to go.
All the way up to the whole brain, all the way down to individual sets of neurons. So this is a highly recursive, highly complex, very dynamic, evolving fittedness. And I would argue that is thereby implementing relevance realization. There is some evidence to support this.
Okay, so the relevance realization. So maybe that's the task. Maybe I don't know what we're supposed to be realizing. But it feels like there is some information processing. And I have a link to this map if you guys want to look at. There's a PDF of the self-organizing universe, the emerging paradigm of evolution, and the handbook of human computation. Those are all going to be linked in here. So let me just hop over to the beautiful money bit again. So we're talking a little bit about evolution. I'm going to try to see. I'm trying to remember where Galia is. I'm kind of frustrated with myself because I did not. Here's the Sacred Economics book. I'm just going to go through Charles's stuff. Here's the Cello Foundation. And this was a Medium post they did in April of 2022, talking about the Climate Collective. And they're bringing the regenerative finance to the masses. And so they were working with their Toucan protocol layer. And I thought it was interesting that there were two comments on this post. One from Daniel Pinchbeck, who said that he was the editor and publisher of Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. And I wasn't familiar with Pinchbeck. I think probably people who know more about all of this stuff do. They said, I was talking to Jason, and he said, yeah, no, he's very well known. But his focus is sort of like shamanic stuff and psychedelics. And again, Charles has his own sort of psychedelic stuff going on too. So this idea, again, I keep saying that I feel like it's not just a material reality that they're looking to coordinate, but a collective unconscious or people who are in altered states of consciousness. Yeah, here's, Pinchbeck. Why is this not? Exploring shamanism and via ceremonies, and was like a Burning Man participant. So, I thought it was interesting that he was the editor, because then it does have a different vibe to it. Oh, and so now I'm going to go ahead and play the Lover Earth part. So again, remember I was talking about the mythos, the Camelot, the Round Table, the falconry, the troubadour, and the love. And then so here is Charles talking about his vision of the switching from the unconditional love of Mother Earth to the Lover Earth program. Let me see, transition there. I thought this is interesting. So when he says, he was like, well, let me just tell you, I was channeling the oversoul of humanity.
Let's just say I channeled the oversoul of humanity. I wish I had a more palatable way of putting it, but here I am.
Yeah, so I think we could maybe think about how he was channeling the oversoul of humanity.
In conversation with Earth. And she says, I am Gaia and I am dying. And it's already too late. But there's another spirit waiting to inhabit Earth after this extinction. It's happened before. Reincarnation happens in this planetary body, and there's another spirit waiting to come. Your relationship with this spirit, this is no longer Mother Earth. This is Lover Earth. You will not just take, you will give and receive equally.
So how will they keep track of giving and receiving equally? Well, I think that would be the Web3 protocol layer.
You will co-create.
Now, I think co-create, again, that's this decentralized emergence.
And she very much wants to come and join you and to bring life back into this planet. But for that to happen, first there must be a courtship. You must demonstrate your fitness for this partnership.
Now the fitness, I feel like that's the fitness landscape. That's the sorting through of the fitness landscape and the gamification, the genetic algorithms.
How do you do that? It's, of course, through gifts. Anything that you do, anything that you put out into the world that is in service to life, because remember, life creates the conditions for life. Anything in service to life is part of the courtship ritual that says to this spirit, yes, I am a worthy lover. And so this means anything from regenerative agriculture to the regeneration of the social body. Anything in service to life is a prayer.
Now, the regeneration of the social body, that will be sort of part of the social prescribing. That'll be, what he's not saying is that this is the Sustainable Development Goals.
That exercises effects beyond our comprehension. Because, in fact, the world does not work according to Newtonian force. In interbeing, the causal principle is morphic resonance.
Now, this is interesting. Let me see. I'm just going to pause for a second. So there's the video that Charles did with Sepp Kamvar of Cello, where they actually talk about morphic resonance and this idea of like criticality, and when groups get together and have sort of a new way of thinking or being, that once it reaches this critical state, it can like manifest or be available like at far distances. And so I sort of feel like the whole network effect coordination mechanism, like beyond the self-organizing criticality and creating emergent new ideas, is this idea that somehow they will be able to maximize our speed up evolution towards this noetic hive mind consciousness thought form by doing AI mediated coordination of cognitive or psychic knowing, and then jumping it through the morphic field like around the world, and then like literally speeding things up really quickly. So again, the conversation around AI, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned about work and all of these other things that are going on, but the thing that's being left out is the protocol layer and some of this self-organizing theory that's going to happen through that. And it's not just AI against people, it is a biohybrid design. Is AI managing people? It's like us becoming the pets of the AI. So, sorry, let me...
As Rupert Sheldrake describes it, the knowledge that any change that happens in one place generates a field of change that allows that change to happen more easily everywhere else. Any act of kindness, any act of generosity creates a field of kindness and a field of generosity. And that means that we are all equally powerful, that no act is wasted, and that every act has cosmic significance.
And I'm not, to me, that doesn't sound so bad. I mean, I do like the idea that we have agency, that it matters, that acts of kindness matter. I mean, that's really a lot of what I do when I go out and I set my intentions, is this idea. But I'm not standing up in front of like a whole room full of people, central bankers doing this. And I'm kind of frustrated with myself because I'm not finding the thing that I wanted to show. But I'm gonna play this now. So this is Charles saying who was at this event.
I'm noticing here at this conference, for one thing, it's quite extraordinary, the mix of people that we have. I speak at a lot of conferences, but I rarely am present with people who are really in elite positions in what you might call the matrix. When people come to my events or my retreats, it's usually because they are, a former Obama administration official or a former hedge fund manager who's kind of left that world. But here we're having people from the World Bank, from the Federal Reserve, Larry Summers was here, my goodness. That world, and a world of tea ceremonies and yoga and myth-making, Rianne Eisler, Sherry Mitchell, people speaking about indigenous knowledge, all in the same conference together. Magic.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Let me just get back to. Oh gosh, I think I've lost my. Sorry, I've got to. The beautiful money one. Yeah. So it's, there were a lot of important people there. That event mattered. That event mattered quite a bit. And I'm just going to sort of zoom in a little bit. Douglas Rushkoff was there, this cypherpunk guy. Just to sort of clarify about Sepp Kamvar and why I'm so upset about Cello, Charles, and I've kind of been like stalk tweeting his page just to like keep asking, like, how does this connect with your ties to Cello? How, and I'm not being a snark. I don't have full on snarkiness. I'm like only medium snarky about it, but he's never answered. And if you look at his Twitter, like I went in and I did a search for Cello on his Twitter handle. There's no results for Cello. He's never tweeted about Cello. He's never tweeted about Sepcamvar. He's never tweeted about digital currency. So if you just sort of followed, and again, maybe he doesn't have the most active account that way, but this entity is a real problem. And for me, Sepcamvar, while he was at MIT heading their social computing, he developed this Montessori program, right? That Wildflower Montessori that on the surface looked great, like natural materials, natural light, wooden toys, but it had artificial vision on the ceiling, artificial vision cameras tracking the children. Like you can see, this is a view from the camera. And they were tracking the kids. I'm just going to go ahead and play this clip because it's just this is only 2 minutes. It was tracking the children and their social behaviors in the classroom. Now, at the time that I first wrote about this, I knew that this was for impact finance, but I didn't understand that about the ant computer and training children up for the ant computer. So when Charles is talking about his beautiful money and, being so chivalrous and courting a earth lover with beautiful things about social relationships, this is what's standing behind it.
The third principle is that it's a lab school dedicated to understanding.
And this is Sepcamvar, by the way. There's Sepcamvar, and then at the end, there's a bit from a guy who helped develop the sensor networks and install them in the toys.
Children and advancement of the Montessori method. And so we explore things like putting video cameras in the ceiling and using image recognition algorithms to understand what each child is working on.
Using image recognition algorithms to understand what each child is working on, right? These children were a test bed.
At each time, and then feeding that data into data visualizations that show what each child is working on during the day, during the month, and during the year. And so we can create software that's like an acupuncture for society, that can unblock people's natural ability to heal their world. And what's interesting about the software that we created for these schools is that it's a self-limiting technology. It comes in and kickstarts a social process, but the software plays a foundational but ultimately limited role in the ecosystem that it fosters.
Shoes and a tray. What does this have to do with data? It can mean a lot if you are Wildflower Schools. They wanted to track activities within the classroom. This way, the school can better understand what activities are working and what the children like to do. We help them take their idea from concept to a fully developed product. This includes doing hardware, firmware, enclosures, and mobile and web applications to help bring the data to life. The shoes have a sensor right here. The tray also has a sensor right here. We use Bluetooth and an in-classroom network to make it work seamlessly. By creating new data, Wildflower Schools can now have more insight into how to teach more effectively. At Lab 651, we make new things possible. All you need is an idea and maybe a pair of shoes and a tray.
A pair of shoes and a tray. That's a little shocking. And let me see. I'm gonna put. So okay. Okay, so that's SAP, Camvar. Yeah. So and Charles's work was their inspiration, essentially. This is a Medium post from someone in their Berlin office and saying how excited. This is from 2019. Cello, it's CELO, means purpose in Esperanto. But I think cello is also like a cell, so a holon. And you'll see the logo is two intersecting circles, which is the Ven, or the Vesica Pisces. And so, she's talking about her welcome employee package, and the welcome employee package comes with a a copy of Charles's book on sacred economics and a little pin, and she's just so excited. And so again, he's not just an advisor. His essentially the ethos of his book, which is built on the work of others, is really core to their whole program. And again, I encourage you, if you're not familiar with Cello, Leo Saraceno has done quite a bit of work on it over at Silicon Icarus. So if you just go to Silicon Icarus, if you Google Leo Saraceno Silicon Icarus, there's a lot of stuff that will come up. I think he has like 7 or 8 pieces. I will just add, since we've also got a bit of the the mythos involved, and the Vesica Pisces, this idea that it is, it's also been used in Freemasonry. It's a proportioning system in architecture, and there's a design, and I think it's from the early 20th century, like Art Nouveau. The chalice well in Glastonbury, it has a Vesica Pisces on it, and there's the image here, and it says it's the interface between the spiritual and physical world. And so I do feel like that's what this digital programming is about, is to try to use a digital network to tap into our spirituality. And again, it's either the fish symbol for Christ, or a picture of the vulva and a symbolic femininity. But there's I think Glastonbury was supposed to be, is it Avalon, where King Arthur ended up? This chalice well is in Glastonbury, near Glastonbury Tor. And there's another picture of the well, and it is the wells are used in mythology as gateways to the spirit world. And there's a sword that bisects the circles, a possible reference to Excalibur, the legendary sword of King Arthur. So there's the Camelot aspect that goes along with this depiction of the Vesica Pisces. Yeah, so, and let's see what else I've got. So anyway, the whole stuff with Sepp Kamvar really obsessed. Now, Sepp Kamvar worked at MIT Media Lab before being at Cello. He was colleagues with Sandy Pentland. Actually, here's an image of him weirdly on Joy Ito's Flickr account. It's a picture of Sepp Kamvar, Kent Larson, and Sandy Pentland at Joy Ito's house taken in 2012. So this is right before they developed. Sandy Pentland worked with Clippinger to develop the Open Mustard Seed project. So he knows these guys, the guys that are working on all of the human dynamics. And this is just talking about the Windhover transition using digital identity. So this idea that the government is behind all of this really sets aside the actual history, that this was developed with intention in the academic setting in a university that had a lot of defense interest ties, is the home of the digital economy, right? The cryptocurrency space, MIT Media Lab's cryptocurrency space. And they were developing ID3, not the government. The government, I mean, NIST was doing something, but ID3 wanted something that was even more flexible than what NIST was developing. So they brought together in 2013, so it hasn't even been that long, just 10 years. They met up in New Hampshire, and I think John Clippinger has a house there. His consultancy is based in Jefferson, New Hampshire. It's 18 miles from Mount Washington. So it's Mount Washington State Park, public lands goes pretty much right up to Jefferson. So it's almost like Clippinger lives as close to Bretton Woods as he can get. And that's where the retreat was. Then there was another retreat, and I don't know if this is at the same place, the following year to continue working it out. This is Clippinger in the green shirt in front, and Michaela Uliaru, the Romanian scientist, here in the front row. So working on developing the digital identity plan. These Windhover principles for digital identity were adopted with support from 21 top Bitcoin and digital currency companies, right? So this is essentially what Bobby Kennedy is asking for, is like a world run by cryptocurrency companies, pretty much, and let the market decide. That's what he literally said at the Bitcoin conference. So he's using government authoritarianism to move us in this direction. So, in addition to the people who were supporting, like Ripple was closely involved in that. the paper, I wouldn't sign up for a subscription to that Scribd or whatever, but one of the papers was uploaded by this guy Joel Dietz, and he was led this swarm report. Evidently, he was also part of the early Ethereum network and had some role in the development of the MetaMask program, which are these early digital wallets. This is him, Dietz. So the digital identity thing has been going on for a long time. And then I have Uluru, and you should really check out. I told Jason I feel like we need to do a whole session on her. But her focus is she describes herself as an alchemist, innovating at the nexus of AI, IoT, and blockchain, championing emerging tech as a business/government advisor. Her PhD is in robotics and distributed intelligent systems design. And if you just walk through, she's an advisor to the Consilience Project, and that goes back to E.O. Wilson bringing together the physical sciences and the social sciences. She describes herself as the chief AI alchemist at SingularityNet. And then she's also an advisor, Global Agenda Council advisor at the World Economic Forum. But what I find is more interesting is so she was part of Jim Rutt's Game B. And again, that's using blockchain to develop the Game B. And she's a strategic impact officer for Input Output Hong Kong, which is Cardano and Charles Hoskinson, and part of the Oxford Blockchain Strategy Education, whatever. So Michaela is involved in a lot. And again, I just have this image of the Game B decentralization. And, Jim Rutt, he came out of MIT. He was a trustee at Santa Fe Institute and was working on Big Chain database, Big Chain DB, and evolutionary AI. And so I think that actually he was linked with Trent McConaughey of Ocean Protocol. And, I think it's Bruce Pons is another founder of Ocean Protocol, and they have quite a bit of their workforce in Romania. And so I'm assuming Uluru might be the contact for the tech in Romania that Ocean Protocol has there. But there's like a lot of synergy between Game B and Ocean Protocol. And it's interesting because what Rutt was pushing early on was something called the Emancipation Party that was pushing UBI and a citizen's wage and non-rivalrous public goods. But I feel like the Emancipation Party probably is a bit transpartisan, which is the healing the divide that RFK Jr. is going after. And part of what Game B is involved with is meta psychotechnology and Civium. So that is the collective problem solving, and using neurohacking and nootropics and psychedelics to get into that collective problem solving phase. So I think what Charles is talking about with the money is all interconnected with this stuff. And then we have Rianne Eisler, who gave a keynote that night at Bancor, and she's very old. She's in her 90s. She and her husband were both connected to the systems engineering program with Ervin Laszlo, where they were revisiting Darwin and saying, no, actually Darwin wasn't survival of the fittest. Darwin was much more about cooperation and mutual aid, which, on the one hand sounds great, but we know where this is all going. And so her husband, who had been connected to the Navy, he and she were working, they were gathered by Laszlo in Budapest, to develop a new perspective on the Cold War, through mutual cooperation. And that's how, so this merging of the new version of evolution, which is described in this interview Eisler did with her husband before he died, was that he was talking about Darwin, being out in front of the idea of chaos theory and self-organizing systems. And that spontaneity was actually much more prominent in the books than survival of the fittest. And so bringing this to the foreground, again, I think that this is sort of connected to E.O. Wilson and the social insects. And, we've got Laszlo, who's, as usual, the systems theorist, connected through his son, Alexander, to Pavel Luksha, the transhumanist, informed by Ludwig von Bertalanffy, who is a systems engineer and a Nazi. And this idea of a world homeostat, which Charles talks about a lot, is this idea of a steady state economy, a circular economy. And then this would be accomplished through these community currencies, of which Will Ruddick is one of the biggest use cases. Again, Jem Bendell, who was featured recently in The Defender with his new book, Breaking Together, has been working with Ruddick since 2012. And what I always thought was really interesting about Ruddick was that he is a physicist. He was ABD, which is all but dissertation, at University of Colorado Boulder in high energy physics. And eventually, I guess he got a PhD in development economics, doing impacts and modeling of private credit systems and community currency systems. And then he was based as an associate scholar in complementary currency out of the University of Cumbria, which is where Jem Bendell is based. But he has an interesting background because he was working on this community inclusion program in Kenya since 2010. And, he's literally finishing up his dissertation in high energy physics and decides to do a total pivot and then go into the Peace Corps, do the language training in Kiswahili, so that he could go and implement this new community currency. And then eventually after that, he worked briefly. He only spent like 11 months as a Peace Corps person. So I'm assuming it was just to get the language training. And then he was a consultant in Geneva on this community currency, Community Forge, to develop out the Kenya model, this grassroots economics of Serafu. And then he started to implement that. Right before he implemented that, he spent a year being the director of community currency for Bancor, which is Galia Benartzi, and then went on to found Grassroots Economics. Although I guess there's some overlap because he founded it in 2009. So he founded it right after as he left the Peace Corps. So he was doing all of this at the same time, working with Bancor on grassroots economics and digitally based community currencies. Now, what I thought was kind of interesting was while he was in Boulder for 3 years, he was a consultant to something called Shifting Culture. And I happened to find Shifting Culture here. It's also known as the Trauma Dynamics Institute. And I would say that's something that I've noticed a lot with the climate narrative, with the Bendell, with the Joanna Macy, even with Eisenstein, is this idea of collapse and trauma. Like, I think that there's an intentional trauma program that's built in. And so it's interesting that the shifting culture, like you need trauma to shift the culture. So this Trauma Dynamics Institute was based in Boulder. It's framed as an educational institute. I guess it was, I don't know if it says when it was, I guess started in 2003. It was run by this guy, Eric Wolterstorff, who is a cultural psychosocial development, he's an expert in cultural psychosocial development and group trauma, particularly the behavior of societies responding to existential long-term threats. Okay, so this is his background, and then he's the head of a crisis management firm and doing turnarounds in various programs. So he's a trauma psychotherapist involved in group trauma based in Boulder. He also does work in nation building and social impact investment, right? So this is who Will was with before. Their Sovereignty First program, their mission is to strengthen the psychosocial capacity of countries in 4 measurable dimensions: inclusion, common understanding, trust, and self-governance. And I'm assuming the digital currencies will be a part of that. These are their investment advisors, Kurt Lieberman, Brett Wayman, and Audrey Salian. She's with Rianta Capital Zurich, Impact Investing at Investment, a CEO of Global Magni Asset Management, right? So these are all people who are dealing in trauma behavior and social impact investment. And then it's interesting that Michael Brown, who was the disgraced head of FEMA after the Katrina, ended up landing at this firm. He returns to disaster work in 2008, and Mr. Wolterstorff, the head of the consulting firm, said he justified the hire, saying, "Well, he knows how organizations function and dysfunction in crisis situations, which has tremendous value." So that's a bit creepy that the ex FEMA guy landed in this Boulder nonprofit that then moved on into community currency and social physics. And, this was getting a lot of coverage. It even made the mainstream. Newsweek magazine had a whole article on grassroots economics in 2019. It is an impact award winner. So they need the digital currency again to coordinate everything and to work on the physics of money, which is like negative interest rates and velocity of money and all of these sorts of things that, who knew you would go into high energy physics, work at Stanford linear particle accelerators, and then shift into community currency. But he knows Jem Bendell really well. They wrote a paper together on complementary currencies in Kenya, the case of the Bangla Pesa. And you can see here Ruddick and Jem Bendell out of the University of Cumbria. And they were talking about the fact that this whole program was reliant on donors. So this is what the Giving Pledge is. This is what, the patriotic billionaires are. This is what is going to happen if we allow ourselves to live in the protocol layer. It's going to be run by the billionaires, not by the regular people. They're going to tell us it's democratic and decentralized, but it won't be. It's all running on the flow of cash from the tech billionaire class. So they were issued to community members, and it said that they would pay for trash pickup and tree planting. They picked up 20 tons of trash and planted thousands of trees. That's how they used their money. And so I think it's really important to know that they develop these certain use cases and then they spin them out other places. So there was a Little Haiti program in Miami, again, where RFK Jr. just was presenting to the Bitcoin people because it's the Bitcoin land, the crypto land. And they've tapped a local guy in Little Haiti, the Little Haiti community of Miami, to do what? Trash pickup for crypto. And so they're modeling this same program, darn it. And this was, I'm not sure if I don't have the date on this. I'm not sure if it's pre or post lockdowns, but they're talking about like picking up trash and be rewarded in crypto for every pound of trash that you clean. And so that's the beginning of where this is headed. Let's see, is this? Yeah, I'll just play this really quick. This is this guy, Nandy Martin, Captain Haiti, and he's branded as like a Marvel superhero.
That message received loud and clear.
It's your responsibility to take care of the trash, the plastic bottles, even if you're not the one that threw it down.
The lobsters who live here will thank you. So will the dolphins, the manatees, the turtles, the fish, and the sharks.
All right. So, yeah. And plastic bottles, I will just point out that, Mr. Camelot, decided to fund, his river keeping with by funding a water bottle company with plastic bottles. But so this is Will Ruddick in the middle. Evidently, these vouchers that they were handing out were illegal, and so they were threatened with jail time with the people who participated. So nice going, Will. So they had to crowdfund their court fees. I guess this happened in 2018, and they're presenting it to Bancor, and this is Bendell talking about it. So he's been connected to Will Ruddick all this time. And again, this is a guy who's also supposed to be connected to Extinction Rebellion. And the quote, this is Will Ruddick, I guess, talking about the running afoul of the law in Kenya. Basically, we printed pieces of paper that has meant that people could eat more meals a day. So what is wrong with the world? Will Ruddick at the UN RSID Ramix Association Cumbria University Research Seminar with Bancor and Galila Benartsi. So Bancor has been behind all of this. And, in some of these use cases so let me just go. So, I kind of called out Bendell on this, and I'm like, yeah, I see what you're about. Like, here are all the links to the maps. Like, I know what your Web3 game is. And so this is how Bendell replies. He says that my game, also described as sweet doomer grift by somewhat similarly wide-eyed as yourself, includes growing organic food in agroforestry projects in partnerships with NGOs in Indonesia, helping local seaweed farmers get better incomes, co-leading meditation retreats with Buddhist temples, and playing devotional music. Now, I will say that the Buddhist part is really central to this because the mindfulness and the meditation, again, not that I have anything against it being used within its appropriate cultural context, but the Western appropriation, this guy, Schumacher was framed as Buddhist economics. William Drayton early on with Ashoka, framing it as Buddhist mindfulness. They've targeted Bhutan as their happiness measurement economy, like the nation of happiness. This is on purpose, this idea of yoga and mindfulness. It is moving people into the unified mind space. And again, I don't have a problem with people whose cultural practice it is pursuing that in that regard. I do have a problem with like all of these things that they're talking about, agroforestry, organic food, and seaweed harvest. Those all sound like fine projects. They're going to be connected to regenerative finance. They are, and they're not going to say that they're not, because they are doing it. So they're just going to tell you about the nice sounding projects. They're not going to tell you about how the satellite surveillance is going to be woven into all of this, right? And so I think him talking about meditation retreats and devotional music, that is part of the collective consciousness access point that is important for us to like pull out that thread and notice that. So he says he's so grateful for his freedoms because his university pays him to go do all these things. But I'm like, my reply, it says, it seems like you're playing the role of a pawn to advance the convergence agenda. Maybe not for the first time. Maybe the third time will be your charm. Experts like you get the ball rolling for sustainable cybernetic futures of measured mindfulness. And imagine that we're so callow that we don't understand what you're saying about Web3 refi token engineering, right? They're calling me wide-eyed, right? And he has no idea like how much I know about exactly what they're up to. So again, I said using the term wide-eyed is a way to deflect from the fact that you're either ignorant of the terrain in which you operate or you are an accomplice. Rogan and Peterson, he'd also copied Rogan and Peterson on this or whatever. I said, they're also in my map with sustainability, game B, and integral theory. So yeah, that was just like my frustration over this. This is, again, just to reiterate about Kennedy, he was tweeting on May 3rd about the need for digital currencies. Just as biodiverse ecosystems are resilient, so too will our economy be more resilient if it has a diverse ecology of currencies, not just a single centrally controlled one. And yeah, that's straight up Leotair. Kennedy is part of all of this. And that's why Eisenstein, and the other thing that's interesting, the Windhover principles, I was talking about digital identity. It's actually a poem. I don't know if you say Windhover. The poem is by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it was written in the 1870s and published in 1914. And it says, Windhover is another name for the common kestrel, Falco tenuculus. The name refers to the bird's ability to hover in midair while hunting prey. So again, we've got the falconry coming back in the Windhover aspect. I'm just gonna kind of keep slogging through this so I don't have to do this map next. So here we've got, so I talked about Rianne Eisler and her husband, tutored by Irvin Laszlo. He's definitely a man behind the curtain. Here is ICUS. I've talked about this before. The International Conference of the the International Conference of the Unity of the Sciences, and that's sponsored by Reverend Sung Young Moon in South Korea. It started in 1972. The first one was in New York. They were in different locations, but definitely backed by the Moonies. And the ICUS was bringing together the physical sciences and the social sciences with sacred religion, and Laszlo was on the committee and presenting the second year of that, the role of general systems theory in the conceptual synthesis of the coming age. So, don't tell me they didn't know what digital currency was coming. At the conference, they were presenting the modern science and moral values, and we'll hear a lot more about a moral economy, not just ESG, but morality specifically, bringing together coherency among laws and principle of the natural sciences, a unity that embraces not only natural science, but the humanities and the social sciences. And this comes back to E.O. Wilson's consilience, which actually was later than 1972, so maybe E.O. Wilson got it from them. But yeah, so Ervin Laszlo is sort of the coordinator on the World Homeostat. Again, also a mentor, an academic mentor to this woman, Joanna Macy, who works on deep adaptation with Jem Bendell. Charles Eisenstein also talks about deep adaptation. And she's also into Buddhist philosophy, an eco-Buddhist philosopher. Again, focused on trauma, and I think this is trauma-based mind control. And, honestly, as a parent of a young adult, I'm really pissed at the way in which young people have been tormented, not just through the lockdowns, but also through the world-ending narratives, to think that they have no future. That really pisses me off. And that's something that's happened on purpose, to move people in the direction of accepting all of this, to accept living in the protocol layer. And, this is a quote from Macy's, no relation to the Macy conferences, Macy's, unfortunately, but she's talking, this is a quote, "To be alive in this beautiful self-organizing universe, to participate in the dance of life with senses, to perceive it, lungs that breathe it, organs that draw nourishment from it, is a wonder beyond words." And so she's definitely part of the systems theory. She has a lot of different books, but again, when you start looking at the books, like one of them is called World as Lover, World as Self. So that to me is just exactly what Charles was talking about. That was published in 1991. She has another one published that same year called Mutual Causality in Buddhism and General Systems Theory. So they're mixing meditation with the systems management. And I'm sorry, I don't know why I put these letters on here, but here's another one, Thinking Like a Mountain Towards a Council of All Beings. And that's the interbeingness that Charles speaks of. So lots of conceptual overlaps there. And again, we've got Leotaire. Leotaire was looking at creating this ecology of currencies, and he was behind this, the European Currency Unit. So he was an engineer. He was a currency engineer and a currency trader, very much. And I just have this map. You can see him down here. A mentor to Galea. Connected to B Protocol. He informed Will Ruddock. He informed Eisenstein. Actually, they said that Galea said that Leotaire and she, loved Eisenstein's Sacred Economics books and his climate book. And then we've got, I'm just going to hop over to Zargam. Did I get all of Ruddock done? Let me just see. I'm going to look, here, I just have a little bit more on Will Ruddock. So this is his Twitter. He doesn't have a lot of tweets, like 2,900. Grassroots economics, and he's really playing up the, handmade crafts. Here, basket weaving, local culture. And I think this idea about incorporating culture into the digital economy is important for the AI. Here, come see what grassroots economics is all about. It's about indigenous blockchain. And they're pushing this really hard. Indigenous and also Afrofuturism. This is a tweet from May 15th. Grassroots economics empowering local communities to shape their economic destiny. It fosters bottom-up approaches to development where community members actively participate in decision-making and build social cohesion. So again, the actively participate in decision-making will be through tokenization. Maybe not now, but eventually. That's the goal of social physics, that is the tokenized democracy. And then he talks about an economic commons, a collective agreement to manage mutual credit for shared prosperity. And this is all the stuff you'll hear about human flourishing. It establishes rules and norms for resource use and harnesses the power of cooperation and solidarity to create an equitable and sustainable economic system. And again, they're acting as though those communities didn't have that before Western interests came in with their digital tokens, right? I mean, that's wrong. Community inclusion currency, a grassroots and circular instrument for resource coordination. And that's everything that I'm talking about complexity and emergence and criticality. CIC promotes social cohesion and draws from indigenous practices of mutual aid. And I think that that's really like a lot of BS. And, my concern about some of the stuff with indigenous practice and mutual aid is that they're actually like incorporating it into the protocol layer, this idea of chamas, which are mutual credit societies, that they're building that into the blockchain as well. And yeah, let's work on it. And then my reply was, do you tell the Kenyans that this is about turning their economies into cybernetic games of social physics towards convergence/emergence? And they never respond when I ask these questions. Again, this is just an image from one of Leo's writings at Silicon Icarus talking about the bonding curves in Serafu and grassroots economics. So I really encourage you to go look at that. And yeah, here's the quote. As of December 2022, the nonprofit behind Serafu and many other community inclusion currencies, grassroots economics, has found a new home on Cello, right? So really, Charles Eisenstein is directly connected to Will Ruddick through Cello, and Cello's participation, like grassroots economics ties to Cello and the token engineering. And you know what? If you're still hanging with me, I want to go ahead and play the clip from the blockchain highlights. It's 10 minutes, but I think it really helps you understand the way in which that they're masking this idea of, basket weaving and carrying and flourishing. When you see the people who are in the room and the history that comes behind it of what Bretton Woods actually was, that it set up the World Bank and the IMF that essentially imposed structural adjustment on the global south and made them dependent on humanitarian aid that's now going to be decentralized on digital currency, you'll see that it's just such a fiction. So one sec. This is 10 minutes. And I'm just going to... This is from a 40-minute talk, but I distilled it down. But this says a lot. And again, Charles was a keynote speaker here.
A monetary system, it's right here. And 75 years to the day that the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, the team at Bancor has brought 250 delegates from all over the world, from a myriad of disciplines, not to remake or replace that image, but perhaps to enhance it, to redetermine what value is, and certainly to see if crypto and blockchain can be used as a means to make it more inclusionary.
And again, to determine what value is, and that's what was happening at this Bancor gathering, was they were saying, okay, now we've switched to a new model, and the new model is going to be like, we're going to value things like ecology and community and the household and social relationships, which is all going to be tokenized.
Here's a look at Bretton Woods 75.
Things like the World Bank, IMF, NGOs have done a lot of good. There are other people who would disagree.
Yeah. There were writers.
Join me in looking at our society and our economy as they can be.
And we need that now more than ever.
Even former military leaders, and of course, leaders in the blockchain and crypto space to reflect upon and rethink economies of the future.
75 years ago, 700 men gathered here to design a framework for global economic cooperation.
Global economic cooperation. So I think we need to understand that the economic cooperation isn't just about economies. It's moving towards systems engineering, social systems engineering.
That they hoped would end world wars.
Economic cooperation and interdependence create peace. And that's the historical backdrop to realize the significance of this place. Just part of the reason why the team at Bancor spent the last year organizing and curating this very unique, forward-thinking, yet historically observant conference on the 75th anniversary.
All right. And I just want to say, too, so they spent a year organizing it. This was a very expensive gathering with very high-level people. So this is why, even though Bancor, I think it pulls back and you don't hear about it so much anymore, like the structures that are being built there, it may not be that name, like it may go into hiding and then regroup as something else. But the individuals who were in these rooms were significant. And sometimes it's hard to tell in the crypto space, like what's just a fly-by-night, operation and which ones have substance. But to pull off an event like this, you have to understand that Bancor is a major player in the game to host and get to all of these people to show up. And again, most of their engineering is based in Israel, and Galia, through her aunt, is Netanyahu's third wife, right? So they're definitely connected.
So we're in the gold room here at Bretton Woods, and it's where the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed. Brock, how's it feel to be here?
Well, honored, privileged, historic. And to be able to have a conversation about the future of the monetary system 75 years later in this same space and to sit at this table, how lucky are we?
So I do want to mention, too, that Brock Pierce was an advisor at Bancor. And again, remember, Charles was talking about, we just need a crisis to move these peripheral activities to the center when the center collapses.
All happened here 75 years ago that really set up the post-war economic order, set up the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization. The whole structure of international capital flows were really set by the way in which the people here decided to sign an agreement for setting up these kind of institutions. There are alternatives that they could have picked. They could have picked Bancor, which Keynes had pushed for, a one global currency. Instead, they allowed for continued national currencies.
Now, I didn't know that Bancor, before I watched this video, I didn't understand that Keynes and Schumacher, because Schumacher is really important. That's based in Great Barrington, and that's the Regen network is connected to that. I didn't know that dated to the 1940s. So essentially, it's just being revived. It's just being brought back out now that they have the distributed technologies to run it.
And really put a privileged place for the dollar in that.
One proposal that was made here was actually called Bancor, and it was made by John Keynes. He was the British Secretary of the Treasury. He suggested a supranational currency, a new currency that would be owned by no nation. He wanted this currency to be distributed essentially to all the nations in accordance with their trade balance. He thought that this would be kind of a fair way to jumpstart the post-war economic order.
And the idea of having this currency for currencies is what we are like, that's really, really smart. That's much better than trying to create exchange pair between any two currencies. The idea of Bancor was exactly to be the supranational currency that will be able to connect between all the world's currencies and to be in the middle.
We see...
Okay, so I just want to take a quick break here. Oh, wait a minute. I have to go back up.
And from Westchester to Little Haiti.
So that's why it's really...
One sec. Because I want to play something from I.L. Herzog that talks about language, because I think the currency of currency, the coordinating aspect of it, let's see. Wait a minute. Oh, wasn't that? Wait a minute. One sec. Gallia, the language. Sorry. Yeah, here it is. Oh, no. That's different. Sorry, there's the language one. Oh, darn. Thanks for holding with me. Let me just see if I can... actually, you know what? It's him with the holochain guy. So I.L. Herzog, he's just done a presentation. So this is the Bancor guy, and then he's there with Arthur Bloch, who is with holochain. So the holochain guy is actually talking about the language and the coordinating mechanism. But they're sort of tag teaming it. So I wanted to take a minute and just play this for you.
We look at the evolution of communication, language, and the forms like he was giving examples, writing and that kind of thing, as critical to the evolution of humanity. I mean, if you just look at two things that have shaped the planet in serious ways are language and money, right? Like, we literally move mountains for money, and we coordinate that action through language, right?
So I think they're going to use money as a language. They're going to use tokens, encoded tokens. And if you think about the tokens that they have metadata attached, right? Like, it's going to be a much more robust, quote unquote, language within the protocol layer than our current language that we have. Like that the smart contract encoded tokens are almost like the token can tell a whole story, right? In terms of how they function in the trade. But it's all happening within a machine system.
And so for me, there's another layer behind what Eyal was showing, because his focus was a little bit more on the coordinative capacity of language. But like the earliest examples of writing, just like the first examples of, using it, storing data was a ledger, right? The earliest examples of writing were accounting, were just tick mark type things and a little symbol of what you're counting and that kind of stuff. That's a pretty primitive form of writing, right? Where we're at now has a lot more expressive capacity.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think what they're trying to do is get rid of, erase the oral traditions, like the oral histories that a lot of the storytelling, the oral history storytelling, those were communal storytelling and dynamic storytelling, and they would change based on have nuance, or different elements of the stories would change because they weren't written down, and that's sort of central to a lot of indigenous cultures, that their primary focus is on the oral, not the written. The written is in some way more limited. So it's interesting to think about this transition of a primitive writing that is a ledger, that is a form of communication, that is dehumanized from an oral narrative sharing framework.
What I am suggesting is that what we identify as money is a very primitive form of currency, that there's actually an explosion of currencies that has occurred that we don't know how to recognize. We don't even see it as a class of object.
So I think that that's super important. I think what he just said there, I just want to, I'm going to play that again, because I think people are not again, Jason would say we've never understood what money is, I think, and probably we haven't understood what money is, but it's even becoming less understandable, with the tokens, that we don't know what it is.
Has occurred that we don't know how to recognize. We don't even see it as a class of object, but it is a part of where we're actually encoding our social intelligence for how we coordinate in very complex ways.
Encoding social intelligence for how we coordinate in complex ways. Think about that. That's a big deal. That is the systems engineering. We didn't have that before. Now, and again, that if the power dynamic weren't what it currently is, you could maybe argue that there might be benefits in being able to coordinate across time or distance in ways that we don't have the sophistication to do that yet. But we don't live in that world. We live in the world of incredible power imbalance that hasn't been rectified. There's nothing about this that says that somehow these technologies are actually going to rectify the imbalance. If they were rebellious, you wouldn't be there with the World Bank and the IMF and the central bankers, and you wouldn't be the Treasury secretaries. That wouldn't be happening. You wouldn't have Brock Pierce in the same room with Larry Summers. If it was truly rebellious, if the system was being upended, this is happening with mutual agreement and understanding. But what they're trying to do is find a story that is palatable to move us into the next phase, which is coordinated digital currency towards noetic convergence.
I mean, you pull 250,000 people into a building and coordinate where they're going to go with a little thing called a Super Bowl ticket that has, the section and the row and the seat or whatever, right? We're solving a complex flow problem with this little piece of paper. And we do this.
Now think about that too, what he just said, a complex flow problem. Flow, we've heard flow several times today, right? In terms of thinking, in terms of neural synchronicity, getting in a mental state of flow, fluid dynamics, which is the part of the swarm robotics, being engineered through ferrofluids. All of this is flow. It's a physics. It's being determined by physics equations. And so a lot of how that's going to happen is through cyber physical systems that have certain programs, right? And those programs are going to be the QR codes, right? And the QR scanners, which is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is asking you to donate to his campaign through a QR code, right? It's so ridiculous when you start to think about it. Sorry.
It's all over the place without recognizing this pattern. To me, it's so weird. It's kind of like not recognizing the class of stuff called architecture, because this building's made out of wood and this one's made out of brick and this one's made out of metal and glass, but the principles are still the same. And so what I'm suggesting is actually that we've become very enamored with our industrial age currencies that are based on scarcity and a bunch of, I think, pretty kind of shallow principles in the expressive capacity of currencies, and whole new realms open up available to us from things like blockchain, but things like computers. It's already happening, not on distributed systems, but it changes the economics completely.
And that's the token engineering. That's the token engineering that's all happening. I don't know why I keep going back. Okay. You know what? I want to play one more. So this is like the cyber physical, the cyber physical part I want to just touch on with Michael Zargham. So again, we have Will Ruddick. He's working on their grassroots economics. We have them working. Here's the Hong Kong Time Bank. This is from Shanzai City. So several more people involved. Sean Conway from IXO Foundation, who wants to put South African toddlers, preschoolers on blockchain to build social credit. And then you've got Will Ruddick in there too, and they're coordinating time, right? And this is, what I was saying. I have this paper, activation and synchronization of oscillatory morphodynamics in multicellular monolayer, right? But which is to say, essentially, like oscillations help determine cell division and creating development of tissue and organs. And so managing the oscillations is important. So I think that's part of the time bank vouchers. And it's connected to this Anglican settlement organization that's happening, that's in Hong Kong. Guess what? They first got their vouchers set up during the last economic crisis, and now during lockdowns, they're digitizing them. Like how convenient this all is. And they've got images here of their citywide time bank. Now, if you're going to look for an ant computer, Hong Kong is a pretty good place in terms of like compact. They've already kind of got it set up as an ant computer. So they're focused on digital wallets, digital identities, and marketplaces in social systems. And again, this is all social services, right? When I keep saying that the churches are going to be the leaders in the ant computer space, I mean it. And there's still like the whole, colonial aspect to this. Here's Will Ruddick. Presenting to the Hong Kong Council of Social Services. It doesn't have a date on this, so like nobody's in a mask. I don't know if this happened before lockdowns or what. But so Will Ruddick is part of it, and then here's another picture of him with Sean Conway. So you've got Shanzai City, you've got IXO Foundation and Grassroots Economics all in the same room working on the social physics. And this is one of their diagrams, and it just says exactly, this is running on the IDCC data infrastructure that Leo has written about. They call this decentralized finance for community inclusive development. And right there, you've got smart philanthropy with the grassroots economics, smart philanthropy. And on the opposite side, you've got smart pay for success social impact bonds. And then you've got lots of nodes with micro enterprises and crowdfunding and digital wallets and microfinance and micro equity, and everything just gets broken down. But when he's talking about using money as a language, it looks like this. Like this is what it looks like, and none of us know this language. Most of us have no idea what this language even is. This is just the map that I've made of it, and I've kind of situated it within common fare, the social currency of welfare, where you give the AI your stories, and cloud mines, where we end up selling our unused brain cycles, on blockchain, and the slime mold simulations. It's sort of nested in between all of this. So that's and then the token engineering. Let me play this from Charles. This is him talking about designing money and just knowing that he's promoting, again, debt jubilee, UBI, and digital currency. We'll do this one.
What Rianne Eisler was talking about, this dominator paradigm, that's kind of baked into the cake of a story of separation. And you can see how, and of course, human separate from nature would be another part of that story. So you can see how the money system, the story of money as it is currently constituted, is part of that story. It encourages competition. It generates scarcity. Even things that are fundamentally abundant become scarce when they are subject to money. We have a world of fundamental abundance, mastering more and more of nature, extending our mastery to the nano realm, to the genetic realm, to outer space. And everything will be, and we will solve all of our problems that way. So, I want to go into a little bit of the dynamics of money, that it's not just a philosophical alignment, but the design, the structure of the agreements that we call money inevitably produce competition, scarcity, and growth.
All right, so he knows about the money design piece. And then, yeah, so I'm going to touch on token engineering. Here we've got a paper on community currency, complex systems modeling of community inclusion currencies from January of 2022 from Wien Universität Interdisciplinary Research Institute for Crypto Economics. And this is Michael Zargham along with Andrew Clark and Alexander Mikhailov. So, Zargham is one of the key guys doing the token modeling. And this is what I keep saying about the cyber-physical socio-technical systems, multi-scale networks of networks. And this is the network effect. This is what they're trying to get at with the open mustard seed and ID3 and the digital wallets and the MetaMasks, is to build us into networks to get added value out of us. So I just have two short ones from Michael Zargham on the cybernetics and cyber-physical systems and socio-technical systems.
Large sort of cyber-physical system, which I'll define later, which is the whole world. And that world has issues in its own right, and I'm sort of interested in ways that we can use our understanding of systems to change it for the better. So my talk is actually about cybernetics, which you may or may not have heard of. I'm going to use this sort of limited definition where we talk about the domain of social science and economics and the methods from complexity science and systems engineering. It's more than that, but I'm not going to try to explain this whole diagram or the several transdisciplinary definitions that exist. But what really matters is that this is sort of a formal science of steering systems, and not necessarily in the sense of centralized control, but in the sense of systems that have their own objectives, wants, needs, and they're sort of co-steering each other. It's a sort of critical, sort of semi-formal field that's used to understand the way systems interact with each other. Came about in the 40s, and actually I'll jump to this slide. Brief history from way back till recently. You have cybernetics is actually coined with respect to Plato's reference about the study of self-governance in one of his texts. The word cybernetic was first used by Ampere to refer to the study of the science of government, and in fact its contemporary definition is related to the early control systems and economic network theory that was being applied to everything from evolutionary biology to other social and economic regulatory systems.
Yeah, and so that's the stuff that we need to be paying attention to, in my opinion. Like understanding the physics of the economics and how it relates to biology, the biophysics. And then here's one more. Essentially, he's talking about automating, almost like automating the analytics and the market makers, but I feel like this is related to
basically
biology.
In the past with economic and social decision making, we've been sort of stuck in fuzzy territory because the highly technical systematic methods for making decisions are really hard to apply. And so in a scenario where there's not as much benefit, or it might be hard to justify the benefit, we make decisions based on epistemologically weak methods or epistemologically weak thinking. And when we start automating these systems now, we have this sort of an observability and controllability of our base level transactions with each other. We actually get the benefit of this blue arrow, and we can push some of these methods that are much stronger higher up into the domain of applicability because we can embed them and abstract them away from the end users. So
yeah, so they're automating these things. So like, even if you imagine that you were okay with this game, they're automating it. I mean, they're going to put it on an AI and run it as fast and hard as you can. But don't worry, it's going to be for your own happiness, right?
you can get the benefit of these sort of higher validity methods without actually having to even understand that they're there. In an example of markets, this would be like saying, well, a market is an estimator that's attempting to discover the price of something, but it's really an emergent estimator. If you have things like a bonding curve embedded into an interface or as an adapter between two economic systems, and you design that curve properly, you can actually turn it into a better estimator. And in fact, you could argue that like Uniswap in the Ethereum ecosystem is similar in that the liquidity pool, because of its statefulness, can serve as a stronger estimator of the price than the market would.
Yeah, and so I think all of this automation is something that we're not really prepared to fully understand. So we've just got Zargum. Again, this is let me see, I'll come back. This is, part of the Bancor protocol, again, this part of the map, but just, again, touching on, we've got Leotair, Bernardsey, the B protocol. Over here, we have IXO Foundation, the Impact Data Consortium that we're talking about, the Hong Kong Time Bank, Shanghai City, and the analyst for the Impact, the treasurer of the, honorary treasurer of the Impact Data Consortium that the Hong Kong Time Bank was connected to, was an analyst for BlackRock doing proxy voting in China, right? So you've got BlackRock people like running the informal cooperative economy time banking. Over here we have Zargum collaborating with Ruddick, and Ruddick was working on this multi-currency village market simulation, and we just have papers with Zargum. So they're all sort of in this same mix, and it's off of the image here, but Brock Pierce and Draper are just up off that edge of the image. So you kind of get a sense of the landscape there. This is why it took me so long. It was like running all of my maps together, and here we've got Zargum, token engineering, Internet of Impact, rebirth of cybernetics and Web3, working on token economics and complex adaptive systems, the philosophy of crypto economics. And this is all being framed as commoning, guys. I mean, this is all being framed as stuff that we're doing collective communal governance, right? Stuff as crazy as like cryptospheric ecotechnics. Jason and Leo did some unpacking of this Pat Rawson article about thermoeconomics and cryptospheric ecotechnics and the climate a couple days ago over on Argus Fest. You should go check that out. So yeah, chains and chains and chains and impact and data and cybernetics, and we're just really not prepared to fully understand all of that. Oh gosh. All right, so we've got. Okay, so here's the paper that Block Science did with grassroots economics, complex systems modeling of community currency. Just that's there, aligning decentralized autonomous organizations to precedents in cybernetics. So when Charles is talking about the new story of money, this is it. Like these are the people that he's with, but he's not actually going to be saying it out loud. I'm going to run these last two and then run through the Bretton Woods, and then I think we'll be done. This is on crypto economics with Zargum. This is a short one, just a minute and a half. Cybernetic economics.
Token systems, token economies. For starters, the economic systems are the things that we really care about, right? We might be engineering tokens, but the tokens are just sort of this now tangible economic component. It's a representation of a thing or a right, or could be a good, could be a service, it could be functionally a currency, but at the end of the day, we actually engineer them in order to drive a certain behavior in the
drive a certain behavior. We engineer them to drive a certain behavior. Now, they will say that as happiness and flourishing and communal whatever, but you're being driven. We're agents in the game.
economic system as a whole, which is actually a level of abstraction above the software itself. And I try to make this point pretty closely because often when I first get involved with a project, I get handed a protocol specification. And I'm like, cool, that's the plant of the system. It's the machinery. This is what someone can do. But like, what will they do? What sort of happens? What's the extra layers of incentive control embedded through the tokens? Yeah, we don't really know. Well, what are we trying to accomplish? High-level business goals. We kind of work our way down from a representation of the economic system of interest down to what elements are sort of still under our control to design, what elements are in fact sort of predetermined by the use case or the software, etc. And ultimately, we want to design generally steering systems.
So this steering system. So again, I think it's important to understand, as we move forward in the the healing the divide or, the Hegelian synthesis or what have you, is that they're going to meld like hyper capitalism with planned economies. Like that is the goal. I mean, the stories that we've been told over the last century or whatever about what capitalism was or about what socialism was are going to be fully replaced by cybernetic economics. And then the question is, like, how is the economy programmed? And I think they would like to try to tell us, through radical democracy, through participation with our tokens. But I think it's far more likely that it's what Bobby said, out there, like, we're going to consult with experts like you, Bitcoin people, to decide like what, how to move forward with the regulations and the networks. It's going to be the people who are at the top tier who are doing the engineering. And the engineering, again, it's within the context of what Charles was saying, lover Earth, right? Have you brought enough gifts? And I think, sadly, again, as an environmentalist and someone who really believes that there are things that need to be fixed, I can see why people would have such revulsion to this idea of like the Gaia worship, because I guess I hadn't really spent a lot of time looking at that. But it does make you, especially when the guy is literally standing up and saying it into a room full of people who are building the next second, like, cybernetic economic world order, that you have to be a lover and earn the love through gifts and balancing out the give and take that through the steady state economy. It just doesn't feel good. None of this campaign feels good. So.
And if people were around for Web3, I talked a lot about cybernetics and the sort of history of steering systems and what it means to design them.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay. So, all right. And then I have one more that I want to do here. Okay. So this is the one, this is with Michael Zargham and Trent McConaughey. And they're talking about doing the engineering as if it were like SimCity, the SimCity game.
It's a little bit like SimCity, but you get to step into the city afterwards.
And that's the game, right? They literally know that it's about like building out the world as if it were a game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It reminds me a bit of.
And this is McConaughey. This is Trent McConaughey from Ocean Protocol.
You can even go more extreme. Camelot, right? Which is basically an AMM wrapped by a video game. And I love it, right? Because it looks like a video game, but you're actually doing AMM trading. And this version here, right, doesn't look like a video game yet, but it already gives you a bit of that feel and that insight, right? And, imagine, 2 years from now, someone does something like Camelot did, but for this too as well, right? And it can come there and maybe it will look like SimCity. Who knows?
So yeah, maybe it will look, maybe we'll all just be living in SimCity eventually. So let's see, I'm getting close, guys. I know this is a little boring. I just wanted to make sure that you kind of saw how it all went together. And then tomorrow I'm going to be working on the podcast that Eisenstein did with Bobby and sort of the fraudulent aspects of that. Okay, so this is all right. So I guess I'm just going to finish listening to the Bretton Woods, the blockchain highlights. We have a few more minutes on that, and then I'll call it a
currency as a tool. a tool for human collaboration. And we don't see a limit on how much of this tool that we can have.
We don't see a limit on the tool for collaboration, like limitless what the applications of what they're planning.
The long tail is open to everyone. The vision really is that currency is becoming a tool for the quantifying, the storing, and the moving of the value between people.
Now, understand quantifying, moving, and storing value. Now, we have to understand that the value, based on Riane Eisler's talk, was going to include natural assets and social assets, right? And all of that is going to be quantified, which on the one hand is something that Charles says he's against, and yet he's still advising Cello, which is doing all of the quantification with very invasive surveillance technology.
And it's much more dimensional, that value, than our current monetary system really allows us to account for.
Now, I would say, too, the dimensionality. I don't know if you remember the clip that I played a while back with the guy from Cesium, and they were talking about the NVIDIA's ability to have this high-level processing and all of the back data to predict alternate futures. And so, and almost like a time machine that they could, Rev Labardian, I think was the guy, he's like, yeah, like Rev's building a time machine, right? You got all of this old data, and then you can make predictions out to the future in the Markov, like, cone of possibilities. And so when they're talking about granularity and dimensionality, I feel like this is this added dimension. Like they're actually going to try to create a currency system or a tokenized system of currency and voting that will allow them to project forward beyond into another dimension.
That proposal really inspired us.
Clear is the Amazon. We're really stuck in this low extractive value economy, and so we want to add all of the variables that today are excluded from the equation of how you value land and how you value an ecosystem, and we want to put those in the equation so that then they become monetary value and that they can actually be circulated and create a bioeconomy.
Yeah, so the bioeconomy, that's what Cello is. And again, Eisenstein speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He says on the one hand, like, oh, I don't want quantifying everything like that. Doesn't that feel sacred or, indigenous or what have you? But on the other hand, he's like, he's aligned with an organization that's actively promoting that.
And trying to recalibrate both the measurement and value of different types of economic input.
And I just want to stop for a second. The measurement part, that's something that Leo's been spending a lot of time on looking into the risk, because again, a lot of this is linked to insurance risk profiling and the measurements. Let's see, where is the measurement? Oh, it's over here. I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow. But he shared with me a report called Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification Methodologies in Regenerative Finance. And it's like a 40-page paper about essentially automating the scaling of surveillance tech to fuel the regenerative finance systems. And the paper was sponsored by Cello Foundation. Let me see, where is it? Is it on the cover? I think, yeah, here, with support from the Cello Foundation. So all of the measurement is really important, and the technology is connected to the measurement part of it.
For Growth was Riane Eisler, renowned author and economist.
This conference is dedicated to new thinking, and oh my gosh, is that urgently needed.
And I will just point out that I'm not going to play this, but the Institute for New Economic Thinking is Open Society, George Soros. And in 2013, he did this clip, which is essentially calling for a new economic thinking. And they've put in like millions and millions of dollars buying economists all over the world to set up this new model. And this is, again, just the same year as they were developing the open mustard seed. So when she's like, oh, yeah, we're just calling for new thinking, it's like echoing Soros.
We must change how we measure economic health. Not only does GDP include negatives as positives, it fails to include the huge economic value of the essential activities of the three economic sectors ignored in present thinking.
Now, I want to mention, too, the community volunteer sectors of the economy. And again, they want to measure it. So that means like there's some going to be metrics attached and some sort of level of surveillance and accountability and transparency. Like, so everything, like a mother's love gets measured, a caregiver's, gets measured. But the volunteering part, that is an integral part of the Kennedy legacy, guys. And this is something I'm going to talk a little bit about when I do the next stream. But the volunteerism and the volunteer culture is something that goes back. I mean, in Philly, there were connections between youth volunteering in the 90s. And all of this is preparing us for an economy that supposedly won't need us, right? That we are supposed to then perform volunteer service in exchange for our UBI or our social prescribing. And so like when we're looking at, yeah, sure, I'm not against the idea of volunteering, but you have to look at the overall structure. And if what you're saying is you're going to remove people from career opportunities that they find rewarding and use their gifts to push them into volunteering for something that like they're not even adequately compensated for, and that all of that requires like having numbers attached, like that's a problem. And I think that Ted Kennedy in particular, like that was a key part. And you'll hear RFK Jr. like talk about, like, again, my family, we were always volunteering all the time. Like that was a core part of our family culture. And okay, that's good. But do we have an idea of like what's going to happen if the future of work is to replace your identity as a contributing member of the economy or society into some sort of UBI format tied to data surveillance of all these things?
The natural economy, the community, volunteer economy, and the household economy.
I mean, the things that I care about are things about inclusion. How do we build economies that are more equitable? I care about sustainability, especially environmental sustainability. How do we give agency to people like women, minority?
Agency. And again, agency is like being an agent in the game. And a lot of that, like women and minorities, that is coming through microfinance, which is incredibly predatory. And they'll assign everyone a digital wallet to go with that.
And so the concept of financial inclusion and how we at least give everyone access to the same tools so that people have, call it fairness and equal opportunity, while combined with things like transparency and trust, I think are essential to the world that we want to create going forward. And things like Bank Corps and their protocol to deliver, call it community currencies, I think are one of the things that if you're really interested in this aspect of how we can make the world a better place and how we can democratize the global financial system in a way where every human being on the planet has equal access, definitely one of the rabbit holes I recommend going down.
Now, and again, I want to mention with Pierce, like there's the tie to Bannon too, and his time at Goldman Sachs where they were doing valuing of crypto items, like crypto assets. So, that's important to keep in mind.
Well, my big interest is in the bottom billion, the underserved populations who aren't currently in the economy.
Because that's the mineable resource.
Who don't have identities, who don't have access to the economic system, who don't have access to electricity and the things that we take for granted.
I think it's really great to have these conversations because we're creating systems that needs to work for all of us. And we're really discussing what's happening in the world with inequity.
So and I will point out that they were very emphatic about including half women. That the original Bretton Woods only had very few women, and that half of the participants were women. Again, they want everybody on board.
Great debate begin.
First up, cryptocurrency.
For the first time in history, the sitting president of the United States of America tweeted about Bitcoin. With the introduction of advanced technologies like blockchain, the next 75 years are going to be transformed even more so than the last. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. To steal a quote from Albert Einstein.
Although most of the problems were made on purpose to move us forward in the game.
The world needs a trustless system that cannot be manipulated by governments, bureaucrats, or corporations. So what I'm advocating for is an alternative to the system that we have today that's built on blockchain powered by crypto.
We had wide-ranging arguments in favor of crypto and blockchain as an alternative to the current status quo.
Blockchain gives us an opportunity to democratize this tool called money in a way that we haven't had access to in the past centuries.
So again, do we really think that this blockchain system is democratizing in the way most people understand it? I would say no. And this is the guy from Holochain.
There's a huge opportunity with the advent of cryptographically secure and validated distributed technology for us to really overturn things. And I think this is the natural.
Now, this is not overturning things. Like, if you look and see who's in the room, none of this is being overturned, at least against the will of the existing system. It's transitioning, but it's not being overthrown.
Of course.
Blockchain gives us the opportunity to create a long tail of new currencies for neighborhoods, currencies for affinity groups, for teams, currencies for schools.
Now, so listen to all these little things she's talking about: affinity groups, teams, schools. This is because they have to regulate the emergence, the criticality at this tiny level, right? For the World Sensorium, they need all of these little local organizations with their own little currency signaling for the organizational, for the coordination.
And that's really what we focus on at Bancor.
I'm very interested always in community currencies and how do we deliver ubiquitous financial inclusion around the planet.
And so many people who are today completely outside of the market economy can potentially participate in a market economy, because with digital technologies, you can get down to the scale at which they're operating.
Now, and again, the market economy is going to mean that you have a digital wallet and that you were in the game. And so, again, it's part of globalization and part of the shift from atoms to bits, that we all become digital to be participants in this marketplace. And that's an extractive. I mean, again, I'm not saying that there aren't entities that want Western style banking inclusion or whatever, but once you have that access point, you are part of the cybernetic control grid.
Building not just a currency, but a community of value, you're going to see more and more of this self-reinforcing cycle.
You start using it in effective ways, like how do we move water from being considered a commodity to being worked on as a commons?
So water as a commons, we know that water is important. So this is where the DAOs come in, the decentralized autonomous organizations, and the voting and the tokenizations. Everything in the they're going to describe it as the commons, but they're going to tokenize it and assign it to blockchain digital governance systems.
Now that's interesting. And then blockchain is a really interesting solution for helping orchestrate and govern a commons of water or a commons of air or
a commons of air. What is that even? Like, how does this is Doug Rushkoff, I guess. Who imagines a DAO of air? You know, that's even going to be a thing that we have to need.
Or commons of coal. You know, how do we economize them?
We may actually wind up seeing states embrace digital currency faster than people expected.
Yes.
And I think that the states embracing it, that would have been through the payments. Like, again, it didn't fully happen, but the push towards digital payments for the lockdowns when people were getting that assistance, like the digital transfers and the e-government. So again, it's all of them are involved. It's not one or the other. It's both and.
So we are starting to see it in a meaningful way where we are improving the quality of lives of people that have been very, very disenfranchised for a long time.
Now, again, the improving the quality of life means that all of those people are under surveillance. I just want to emphasize that. All of those people are now placed under surveillance for their own good. And something or some machine is going to tell them what is good for them, what their good metrics are, what their happiness is, and they're going to be programmed that way. And they're going to be under surveillance to be steered into a better outcome, which is the pay-for-success finance contracts. And they're going to go after the people who are, on the one hand, the most disenfranchised, but they're not totally broken. Because the pay-for-success needs a sweet spot of somebody who, with limited resources, can look good on the dashboard.
From treasury secretaries to central bankers.
It's a mix between economics, environmental issues, social issues, technological issues.
To crypto founders.
Our mission, as we saw it, was to present you with a diversity of perspectives.
We heard from writers.
The minute people use blockchain the way they could, which is as a way of reflecting the abundance of a society with...
That's not how they're going to use it, Doug.
Plenty of people who have skills and want to do things.
So again, plenty of people who have skills and want to do things. So this is this is where we're talking about like the globotics, right? The remote robotic piloted workforce, the future of work where you compete to drive a burrito delivery vehicle like a robot, right? That's what it is. It's not some beautiful thing they might imagine, and maybe if the power dynamic were different, it could be more beautiful, but that's not how it's going to be. One person can drive 10 robots in 10 different Walmarts. That's what they're imagining.
That's when it's a threat.
We need to get outside of that old paradigm we're stuck in.
We leave Bretton Woods with that fresh perspective and new challenges facing the monetary system of the next 75 years. They can reshape and reconfigure along the way.
And cryptocurrencies are most well positioned to be that paradigm shift. And in fact, they already are.
What will the next 75 years look like? Global monetary cooperation, community-based currencies, according to many.
There's Charles right there.
Here, we are in the middle of that paradigm shift. This was the perfect historic setting to chart its course. And now could be time to set out on its path.
All right. So I guess that's most of the beautiful money part of the map. But just to sort of sum up for folks. So what I've been focused on this afternoon was really looking at two tracks. Jem Bendell, who was featured in Aaron Van Diver's article about promoting eco-libertarianism as an answer to climate authoritarianism, and his connections to Will Ruddick and community currencies and this deep adaptation sort of systems theory. And then also looking at the news that it's not so new anymore, but like a week or so ago, about Eisenstein joining the campaign, RFK Jr.'s campaign, as their sort of, I guess, in-house philosopher, and what his connections to deep adaptation, Bernard Lietaer and community currencies, Galia Benartzi, and this Bretton Woods event, what that meant. And I think it's quite significant to see how these things are all knit together, because we're meant to understand community currency as and decentralized democracy as something wonderful. But as I've said, the power dynamic hasn't changed. There's been no change to any of the power dynamics involved. And so why should we? They're going to tell us a story that's going to get us to go along with the next phase of the play. And so, again, using the authoritarian government threat that was to shift us towards a tokenized commons of flourishing on blockchain with programmable money and digital wallets, right? To engineer us into some coronation of distributed cognition superintelligence through gamified platforms. And again, it's this optical illusion. Which are you seeing, the young girl or the old woman? Can you see both? Can you hold both at once? And, I'm just asking you to sort of entertain this idea that we need to interrogate the idea of community currency and cybernetics in a more meaningful way. And the next time I come back, I'm going to go through this circle of clips, which is drawn from the podcast that Eisenstein did a year ago with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., despite the fact that he said their relationship started out at the Falconry fundraising gathering lunch. It was not love at first sight over the Falconry. Actually, they knew each other a good bit back, and I'm sure Robert F. Kennedy Jr. thought that Eisenstein's position on climate would be useful to his campaign. And although I have to say, the more I look into Eisenstein, even though I know he has sort of a whole crew around him, just for the regular American, this idea of sort of new age channeling, lover earth, psychedelic stuff, doesn't really seem like an easy sell to your average middle class American. But I guess we shall see. A lot of the things he says sound really nice if you didn't know about Cello and regenerative finance and sensor networks. So anyway, thanks everybody for hanging out. I'm probably gonna try to do the rest of this at some point tomorrow.